an ordinary weekday. Natalie took up her shift and began to habitually follow all the instructions of the head nurse: injections, pills, procedures, everything as usual. She had only recently got a job in her specialty, even though she had graduated from medical school many years ago, right after school. But then a friend persuaded her to go to work as a shop assistant, saying, "Why do you need this penny-pinching, hard work in a hospital? It is much nicer to offer clothes to customers in a cozy shop." And Natalie agreed, especially as there were financial difficulties in the family and she wanted to help her mother. 5 years flew by. During this time, much has changed. The girl has long lived separately with a young man, rented a flat. After her mother divorced her father, she found a new husband, and there was no place for her daughter from her first marriage. Recently, her personal life started to have difficulties. She learned that she was pregnant and was very happy. She thought that now Andrew will definitely make her an offer, which she had been waiting for so long. But things turned out very differently. The groom, instead of legalizing the relationship, immediately packed his things and hurriedly disappeared. And he did it so sneakily, quietly, while she was at work, leaving only a note. "I'm sorry, but we need to part. I'm not ready to become a father. And I wasn't going to marry you. I've been with someone else for a long time. I happen to love her. Don't look for me, and don't call me." The story is as old as the world. The girl cried, grieved, but did not even think about abortion. She firmly decided to keep the child and raise him on her own, and also very angry with herself that she let Andrew so froze her head, believed his fairy tales. And if you think about it, he really did not promise her anything, did not seek to provide for her, to take care of her. He didn't ask her to marry him, but she didn't want to notice anything, as if she was wearing rose-colored glasses. And then one day they broke up. Natalie had to look for another job because the shop owner politely asked her to leave, insinuating that she had no intention of paying her maternity pay, and she remembered her medical degree. She decided to start working in her profession, albeit belatedly. At the interview with the head of the department, she was very nervous, but she did not lie. She honestly said that she was pregnant, had no experience, and would be able to work only until her maternity leave. She looked into the eyes of this gray-haired man, who was twirling a pen in his hands, and thought, "He'll probably say no. Who needs such an employee? And I've already beaten every doorstep. This is my last hope." But to her surprise, Mr. David suddenly replied after a long pause, "Yes, Natalie, your situation is, to put it bluntly, unenviable, but you're doing a good job of keeping your hands up. And you know what? I'll take you. I hope you'll prove yourself and stay in our department even after your maternity leave. But I'm warning you, all of our patients are critically ill. The work is very difficult and specific. You need a special approach to patients. The most important thing is to show compassion, have enormous patience and endurance. Can you do it?" The girl immediately began to answer eagerly. "Thank you for not refusing. I will try very hard, honestly, I won't let you down. It's like a saving chance for me." So the girl started working in the department. She was received in the team, to put it mildly, not very well. Many laughed at her inexperience and wondered why she did not go to work on the profile. They were not in a hurry to help her either, but rather watched how she would get out of difficult situations on her own. But there were also good people who encouraged and supported her. However, as in any collective, Joyce Black, the head nurse on the ward, had been particularly mean to her. Natalie had known her well since their youth when they were in college. They'd had a black cat between them, a fiancé in their sophomore year. Both had a thing for the guy Alan, and he'd chosen Natalie. Joyce was furious, then urged her rival, "Leave Alan alone. He's mine, okay? I've had my eye on him for a long time and you're ruining my plans." But Natalie only laughed. "You talk like Alan's a thing. He's not yours and he's not mine. And anyway, he'll choose the one he likes." And the guy did. There were dates, moonlit walks, and fun in noisy companies. But it didn't work out because they were too different. Alan was risky, the soul of the company, lived one day, not thinking about the future, and Natalie could not. She was nervous, wanted constancy in the relationship and certainty. Soon the young people broke up, but Joyce held a grudge and thought that her classmate deliberately took away her beau. And when she saw her in her department, decided that it was time for revenge and began to harass the new girl in every possible way. She liked to mock the girl in front of everyone. I have one thing I do not understand, Natalie. For what are such beautiful eyes you even our head took the job. Although it seems, I guess, you will become his new mistress. He likes to hit on young nurses, but you're used to it, aren't you? One or the other. You've had a baby with another man, too, haven't you? Natalie blushed like a boiled cancer and ran away in tears. She didn't want to fight with this evil woman, who was also her boss now. She had to put up with it until her maternity leave. She wouldn't find another place. Everyone in the department knew that Mr. David was a lover of women and that his wife had left him long ago. He was a very good specialist, but all these merits crossed one big flaw. The head was drunk. He would stay sober for 6 months, or even a year, and then he could snap and not show up for a couple of weeks, until the same colleagues took him away for coding. And so it went on year after year. But Natalie respected him. He was a great man, always listening, always cheering her up. He took pity on her, hired her. She paid no attention to the gossip about him and treated him warmly. She tried to work on her conscience and not to let him down. On that day, nothing foreboded trouble. She was sitting at her post when one of the patients from Ward 3 approached her. A middle-aged man who was exhausted and could barely walk. He could barely walk, holding his side, took a breath and asked, "Natalie, hello. It's so good that you're on shift today. My labs were supposed to come in. Look how I'm doing. I'm asking you very much." The girl nodded and replied, "Okay, I'll find them. And you go, I'll come to your room and tell you." The girl began to look through the results forms, and when she found the one she was looking for, she aghast. Christopher Morris had such bad tests. It was a wonder he was still alive. It was a disaster. The patient obviously had very little time left, given his formidable diagnosis. She immediately ran to the ward and began to speak. "You, Morris. That's right. There's nothing I can do to cheer you up. Alas, things are not as good as they were in the last few tests. It's much worse now." The man became so sad and thoughtful. He asked bluntly, "Tell me, Natalie, do I not have long to live? Am I going to die soon? It's important for me to know." The girl hesitated and answered evasively, "You can't give up, you have to fight until you win." But Christopher realized that she was just afraid to tell him the hard truth. He turned his back to the wall. Natalie quietly walked out. She was upset herself. It was always unpleasant to give bad news to the sick. Everyone wants to get better, despite the severity of their illness. A couple of hours later, Natalie went into the third room to call the patients for their treatments and found an interesting picture. Christopher was talking to his wife via video link. The girl involuntarily heard scraps of conversation. "Vivian, listen to me carefully and don't interrupt me. I don't have long left, and I want to sign over all my property to you. I've already phoned the notary, he's on his way. But I have one condition. You have to take care of Kevin until he's old enough, you understand. It'll be in the will. I can't have my son in an orphanage after I'm gone. You'll be his guardian. I know you two don't get along well, but that's okay. I'll try to find a good nanny for him while I'm alive. My son will be better off in a family than in an orphanage anyway." Tears came to Natalie's eyes and there was a lump in her throat. She said quietly, "Excuse me, let's go to treatments, it's injection time. Again, I'm sorry to bring you bad news." And the next day, an unprecedented scandal broke out in the ward. Joyce screamed at Natalie, "Are you out of your mind? Do you realize what you've done? Open your eyes a little. Read things carefully when you're asked. We've got 2 Morris on the ward, one in Ward 3 and one in Ward 10. You've got your tests mixed up, you silly girl. The third one isn't dying. On the contrary, he has a positive trend. And what did you tell him?" Natalie babbled as she realized what an oversight she had made. I'm sorry, I'll go apologize right away. It will never happen again. I saw the surname and thought it was him, but I didn't look at the initials. Joyce said angrily. No, I'll go to the patient myself and sort it out, and then I'll go to the superintendent. I'm going to insist on your immediate dismissal. Such a negligent attitude to work is unacceptable. You have no right to say anything to patients. It's up to the attending. What if Morris had hanged himself in the night, or something nervous after hearing the news? Natalie ran to the nurse's room and burst into tears. She was terribly ashamed. It was truly unforgivable. Now she would be fired for sure. Soon she was summoned to the head of the department. She could hardly stand on her feet, but to her surprise, Mr. David said to her, "Well, you've made a mess of things, Natalie. Joyce was shouting in my office, and she's insisting on your dismissal. But I know you didn't do it on purpose. It's just because you haven't had the experience yet. I'm not going to fire you for one simple reason. I really like you, Natalie. After my wife and I divorced, I tried many times to start a new relationship, but it just didn't work out. But when I saw you, I looked at you. You're such a kind, good girl. There's no envy, no malice in you. It's so rare nowadays. I'd really like us to be a couple. I realize I'm older than you, and I'm sure you've heard about my weakness. But still, can I walk you home tonight? We'll go to a cafe, have dinner, get to know each other better. And about your pregnancy, I'll tell you, it's not a problem for me. Having a child is a pipe dream of mine. Why pipe dream? Because I can't have one. So I'm ready to raise your baby. It will be my pleasure." Natalie was stunned. This was definitely something she had never expected to hear. "I'm very pleased, Mr. David, but how can we be a couple? I'm pregnant with another man's child. Why would you want to be such a burden? It's not right. It's not easy to love someone else's child." The superintendent smiled. "And you don't think about it. I know better what's right and what's wrong. Just let me look after you and we'll see." Natalie now had a fiancé and protector in the ward. He would not let anyone hurt her, patronized her, and encouraged her. On the shift, of course, they observed the chain of command and behaved like superiors and subordinates. After work, the man would take her under his arm and lead her home. They talked a lot about life. Mr. David was very tactful, did not allow himself any liberties, and was only trying to get closer to Natalie. The girl herself did not know why she had agreed to this. The fact that she didn't love him was obvious. Yes, it was easy, pleasant to communicate with him. He knew a lot, told interestingly about everything. She respected him as a man and as a specialist. But Natalie realized that they were unlikely to go beyond dinners and walks together. Rumors that the head of the department had a new favorite quickly spread around the department. Only a lazy man was talking about it. This made Joyce even more angry, and she began to write complaints to the Ministry of Health, attributing to the head of the department imaginable and unthinkable sins. She said he had gone completely mad, behaving immorally, not even allowing a pregnant nurse to pass. He also drinks occasionally and is negligent in his duties. Natalie apologized to Christopher. "I'm so sorry, it's all my fault, I messed up. I can only imagine what you've been through because of me. I'm ashamed of myself, I can't tolerate such negligence. I'm sorry again." But Christopher only smiled and comforted her. "Stop apologizing. I heard that mean girl yelling at you. Yes, I was nervous, of course, I can't hide it. I even made my peace in my head, made a will for my wife. But now I'm very happy and glad you were wrong. It's like a stone fell from my soul. It turns out I'll live a little longer. I've got a second-grade son, Kevin, and he's got a lot of work to do. Natalie, it's amazing how much you look like my late Helen. Except she had a short haircut and you have long hair. Since her death, Kevin's been very withdrawn in his grief. He won't get in touch with my second wife. They fight all the time. Lately, things have been so heated, it's impossible to be at home. So I have a suggestion for you. Could you babysit Kevin once a week on your day off? My illness has taken its toll on me, and Vivienne's busy at work with a new project. It's just a bit of a walk in the park with the baby. Keep him entertained for a bit. That's all. I think he'll get in touch with you, because you look so much like his mom." Natalie hesitated. "Well, I don't know. I don't think that's a good idea. What if it's the other way round? Kevin will be even more upset when he thinks of his mom if I look like her. But you're right. It's worth a try, at least while you're in hospital. I feel really bad for you and I want to make it up to you. Dictate an address for me." Mr. David was indeed plagued by inspections and was about to be sacked. He'd been working for the last fortnight. Joyce rejoiced, but she had thought Natalie would be thrown out too, and she had just been retained. The head nurse hated her even more. Now Natalie was forced to work as a nurse and do a lot of other jobs for the same money. Now the girl was throwing up in the mornings. She could barely stand on her feet after her shift. She was very worried about Mr. David. After all, he had essentially suffered because of her. She tried to cheer him up, support him, and most importantly, she was afraid Mr. David might drink again. But, to her surprise, the man was not upset at all. On the contrary, he was actively looking for a new job and reassured Natalie. "Everything will be fine, you'll see. I've already had an interview. They're hiring me at the regional hospital, so I haven't lost anything. I'll get settled, and you'll come to me. So don't be sad. Everything will get better. It's only temporary difficulties." Joyce, of course, knew the news that Mr. David had already found a new place and clenched her fists, thinking to herself, "Well, no, I know what I have to do to prevent that from happening. You'll know how to carry that Natalie around and protect her." That afternoon, everyone gathered in the residence lounge after their shift. It was one of the doctor's birthday. We decided to have a buffet, snacks, champagne. There was no time for long sit-downs. Colleagues congratulated the celebrant and talked animatedly. Mr. David poured lemonade into a plastic cup and also made toasts. But in the fuss, he didn't notice Joyce swapping the lemonade cup for champagne. Mr. David drank it down in one gulp. Only then did he feel a long-forgotten sense of lightness and euphoria. His mood had lifted. He himself did not remember how he drank more and more, and how Natalie looked at him dumbfounded, and then scolded him and took him home in a taxi. From then on, the superintendent had no control over himself and drank every day. Of course, the new position was gone, and he was kicked out of his old job. But he didn't care. Batteries of empty bottles, then sleep, then oblivion. All the problems and worries went somewhere far away. Natalie was horrified. She had never seen such a man before, and she did not recognize the intelligent and attentive Mr. David in this stooped, unshaven, alcoholic man who had aged a dozen years at once. She tried to reason with him, saying something, shaking him, pouring out alcohol, but all in vain. He only waved her off and could barely move his tongue. "You don't have to teach me about life, child. I'm old enough to be your father. I am a man and I have the right to relax. You don't know how much I've got on my plate." Natalie realized that she couldn't live with a man like that. It was torture. Why had she agreed to let him take care of her? It was better to raise a child on her own than to endure such bouts of drunkenness. She was angry with Mr. David, sometimes pitying him, realizing that he was in the grip of a disease and a terrible addiction, and she didn't know what to do about it. Christopher was slowly recovering, although he was still a long way from being discharged. Natalie decided to fulfill her promise and went to his house. The door was opened by a very unpleasant woman. She looked like an angry bird with a sharp beak-like nose, thin lips and brown eyes. She greeted Natalie unfriendly. "Oh, it's you. My husband called. Come in. Kevin's room is on the first floor. I just don't understand why we need strangers in the house. I think Christopher's losing his mind." Natalie said hello, ignored the angry tirade, and walked into the nursery. On the sofa, a skinny little boy with a short hedgehog on his head was lying on his stomach with his legs wiggling funny. He was enthusiastically playing some game on his phone. When he heard someone come in, he looked up, and when he saw Natalie, he rounded his eyes. "Hello. Wow, you look just like my mom. Only the hair is different. Are you my new nanny that Daddy was talking about on the phone?" The girl smiled and replied, "Hi, Kevin. Yes, I'm Natalie, your nanny. I'll come twice a week and keep you entertained. Where do you want to start? How about the park? Do you know how to ride a scooter? You can rent one there. I've always wanted to learn." The boy was so excited. "Sure, let's go. My dad is ill, and they won't let me go far alone." And this stepmother is not interested in what I do. She doesn't care as much as I do. I'll get ready in a minute. 3 hours flew by like a blink of an eye. Kevin was frolicking, laughing at how funny the new nanny was at mastering the technique. They ate ice cream and candy floss, and lastly they went on the Ferris wheel. Kevin proved to be sociable and was eager to talk about himself. "Aunt Natalie, you're great. Just like my mom. Do you know how well we used to live? My dad was funny. My mom always cooked dinner and baked delicious poppy seed buns. We used to watch cartoons together, play games. Mom loved me very much. I still miss her so much. Then she got sick and died. And Daddy cried for a long time and changed, rarely smiled, came home late from work. And then this Vivienne showed up. I gave her a nickname, Crow, and she was always trying to peck me. I didn't like her at first. She's like a sly fox. When Daddy's around, she's nice to me. But when he goes to work, all I hear is, 'Go to your room and do something useful.' You're not a baby for me to babysit. I've got better things to do. I'm in her way every day. She doesn't even notice me, and she doesn't like Daddy. She just pretends to. And there's an uncle who calls her all the time, and she talks to him for hours. I'm sorry you have to go. You're fun and interesting to me." Natalie hugged the little boy. "Don't be sad, Kevin. We're friends now, after all, so I'll come to see you again. Don't forget, you promised to teach me how to make dinosaurs out of plasticine. I can't wait." Natalie liked the little boy. He was so easy to be with. She even forgot about all her problems for a while, dreamily stroking her belly and thinking that soon she would have a baby herself. And looking at Kevin, she realized how happy it was to have a fidgety little boy waiting for you at home, loving you and worrying about you. A week later, Natalie came to see Kevin again. They modeled in the room, then learnt cursive words. It was very funny at school, and then the boy taught her how to use the cool headphones. They barely said goodbye. Once again, Natalie didn't want to leave him. She was already out in the courtyard when Vivienne caught up with her, gave her a hard look, and waved her finger towards the gazebo. Natalie was surprised, tense, and just in case, she discreetly switched on the voice recorder on her phone. There was no telling what Christopher's wife would say now. She had a hunch that this conversation would not be a good one. And sure enough, what Vivienne suggested shocked the nanny. "Look, you come here to make money. I see you're in a position. I'm offering you a lot of money to make with very little work. You're Christopher's nurse on the ward, aren't you? I need you to put a drug in his IV. I'll give it to you myself. That's the job. And you'll get enough to support yourself and your future child." Natalie interjected. "I don't understand. What drug? I'm already giving him drips, shots. Everything is prescribed by the doctor. I don't get it. What are you getting at?" Vivienne was getting angry. "Don't play dumb with me. It's a heart medication. That's what's going to cause the attack. It's not poison, and it won't hurt you. There's minimal risk if you do it properly." Natalie's mouth dropped open. "But you know his diagnosis. If he goes into severe tachycardia, he'll die. So you're suggesting I kill my own husband? This is all for his fortune and his will, am I right? It's horrible. How can you do that?" Vivienne smiled predatorily. "You don't understand anything. So, are you going to take the case, or shall I find another nurse who is more agreeable? And there's no need for me to lecture here. I have no other choice. Christopher bequeathed everything to me, and then, you see, he changed his mind. Is that fair?" Natalie didn't give herself away, though she was shaking inside, and answered evasively. "Well, you realize it's a serious matter. I'll think about it and call you back tomorrow." The girl understood. Kevin's father was in danger. She had to do something. She rushed to the hospital, flew into the room, caught her breath, and began to ramble on. "Christopher, what I'm about to tell you is unbelievable. You should listen to the tape yourself. I had no idea that such a thing could happen in real life." Christopher was shocked. He listened to his wife's ranting several times, turned pale, and then said, "My God, I was so wrong. I thought Vivienne loved me, that we had a family. Turns out she was just waiting for me to die. Kevin kept telling me she was evil, that she didn't love us. and I thought he was just jealous and angry. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. You agree or she'll hire someone else. Then you text her that I'm dead, and then it's up to me what I do. I just want you to take Kevin with you until this is over. I'm really worried about my son now. I don't know what else she's gonna think. I'm sorry I got you into this mess, Natalie. I mean, you're in a position where you can't be nervous, but I'm afraid I can't do without your help. What a fool I was to write that will. But who knew that the closest person I had ever hoped for would stab me in the back? Natalie was very scared, but she still agreed to help Christopher. More importantly, little Kevin, with a stepmother like that, doesn't need any enemies. You can't leave people in trouble. Natalie rang Vivienne and agreed. She took the vial and wrapped it carefully, as Christopher had taught her, so that Vivienne's fingerprints would be on it. And the next day she called again and said, "It's done. I'm waiting for the transfer to the card." And then she changed her voice, and from Christopher's phone she said, "Vivienne, it's you from the hospital. We're so sorry. Your husband passed away unexpectedly tonight. Cardiac arrest." She hung up. Her heart collapsed and went into heels. Christopher cheered her up. "Thank you, Natalie. You did great. You did everything right. Now it's my turn. I'm being discharged tomorrow. I'm going to surprise you. Just take Kevin home with you, please." Natalie, as if nothing had happened, went to Christopher's house and asked Vivienne, "Since you're having a funeral, can I take Kevin with me for just a few days? He's already lost his mom. Why traumatize him again? I've grown attached to the boy. I want to make him happy for a while." Vivienne was even pleased. She'd had enough of that crybaby for a long time, so she'd agreed immediately. Kevin was happy too, and immediately went to visit. He couldn't stand being with his stepmother. He felt with every fiber of his being that she didn't love him. Natalie went for a walk with him. Then they cooked dinner together. She tried to be cheerful, telling funny stories from her childhood, but she felt so uneasy. What is Christopher up to? How will this ever end? What has she got herself into? But Vivienne, overjoyed, immediately rang her lover. "Eddie, we've done it. I want you to come round right away and I'll tell you all about it. And don't forget the cake and champagne. We'll celebrate this victory with you." The man immediately rushed over and started asking about everything. A delighted Vivienne said, "Wow, well done, Natalie. She's a good person. She did everything just right. I didn't even expect her to do it. And most importantly, not a shred of regret. She came, took the boy to her house, and didn't say a word about my husband. Not a woman, but a tough cookie. They called from the hospital. The bastard died. Now I'm rich. All mine, and this mansion and cars." The lover asked, "What, doesn't the boy know yet that his father is dead? You haven't told him. What are we going to do with him for now? If you're not really going to bring him up to adulthood, are you? It's not exactly in my plans." Vivienne winked. Of course I'm going to. It's a major stipulation of the will. But I've thought of everything. I've already found a private boarding school abroad. We'll send him there in September, and that'll be the end of it. I'll just pay for it. I'll tell everyone how much I care about my stepson's future and want to give him the best education possible." Eddie admired his beloved and began to kiss and undress her passionately. "My, you are clever, my queen. How nicely you've done everything. Come to me, my darling. I'll kiss you." Half an hour later, Christopher burst into the bedroom with a video camera in his hands, in the middle of their lovemaking. Vivienne and Eddie just froze like statues. The woman babbled. "Christopher, you're alive, but how? I got a call from the hospital. You died in the night." Eddie was thrashing around, white as chalk, trying to get dressed, but Christopher wouldn't let him. He threw both of them out in what the hell they were wearing and shouted, "You bastard, you're going to kill me. And as soon as you knew I was dead, you were having fun with your lover on our bed, you bastard. But nothing. Now you'll be in trouble. I've got a tape recording of you telling Natalie to kill me. I have an ample with your fingerprints on it. I'll destroy you. You'll go to jail. And that's not all. You must have forgotten about our prenup. It says in black and white that if you cheat, you get nothing. Thank goodness there are decent people like Natalie, or I'd be dead already. The police drove up. Vivian was terribly embarrassed, she wailed. Christopher, I'm naked. Give me my clothes. Everyone's looking at me. I beg you, take back the statement. It's okay, you're alive, nothing happened. I promise I'll go far away, and so will Eddie. You'll never hear from us again. Well, forgive me. Christopher threw her clothes in her face and said firmly, No way. One must answer for one's dastardly deeds. You'll learn that in prison they'll explain it to you. I'll see you in court. I'll file for divorce myself. Vivian and Eddie were taken to the police station. Christopher sat on the doorstep, out of breath. He didn't feel well. He kept thinking, how could he have been so wrong about this woman? He had met Vivian by chance at the cemetery when he was visiting his late wife. She too stood quietly by the grave of a young girl and wept. Somehow they got to talking. Christopher told of his grief, and Vivian said that she had recently lost her sister. Common experiences, the pain of losing a loved one brought them so close. The affair happened almost immediately. Vivian turned out to be so attentive, understanding, tender in bed, and she tried to get in touch with Kevin. But her son couldn't stand her. That's all. Nevertheless, it was Vivian who insisted on the wedding, persuading him. Christopher, when are we going to get married? I want a family. And with Kevin, we'll definitely get along. It just takes time and he'll get used to me. I mean, he loved his mom so much he can't forget her. And then we'll have our own baby later. Right, honey? And the man made up his mind. They got married. But his lawyer, who handled the family's affairs, persuaded Christopher to draw up a prenuptial agreement, just in case. And wow, he'd been right. Christopher shook his head, told the maid to clean up and throw the bed linen in the rubbish bin. He couldn't bear to remember what he'd seen here recently. The man took Kevin home, and the two of them began to live together. Natalie had gone on maternity leave, and now she was always with Kevin. She had a lot of time on her hands. The boy became so attached to her. They did everything together. Christopher also showed her their family photos. His late wife really did look just like Natalie. No wonder Kevin fell in love with her instantly. Christopher had a soft spot for Natalie too, but he realized she wasn't in the mood for that right now. She was about to give birth. She was worried about how it would go. She was also worried about leaving Mr. David. He'd gone to bed and he'd gone downhill. Still, she persisted in visiting him, cleaning the dilapidated flat and trying to get through to him. But the man only looked at her with a hazy, alcohol-fogged gaze, as if he didn't recognize her. When he sobered up, he got angry. I am nothing and a drunkard last. I was kicked out of everything. So what's the point of stopping? Nobody needs me. He felt so sick at heart, so sorry for himself, and he'd go back to the bottle. One day, Christopher couldn't take it anymore. Natalie, you're about to go into labor. You've got a big belly. Think of yourself. Stop coddling David. He's a grown man much older than you and me. If he lives like that, it's his choice. Don't beat yourself up. But the woman shook her head stubbornly. You don't understand. He's a great man and an expert, and he's been so good to me. The only one who defended me from Joyce's attacks. It's a disease, an addiction of the strongest kind, and he can't handle it on his own. We need to convince him to get clean. But then again, he has to want to, otherwise it's all for nothing. I can't watch Mr. David die. Christopher decided that he couldn't watch Natalie suffer either, so he took action on his own. He went to the former superintendent's house. The door was unlocked. He was sitting at the table, unshaven and downcast, finishing the rest of his alcohol, eating pate and cheese. There were bags of empty bottles, dirt and clutter all around, and the odor was simply overpowering. When Mr. David saw his guest, he smiled drunkenly and waved at him like an old friend. He began to speak in a slurred tongue. Hello, mate. Got a drink? You see, we're running low on fuel. Christopher got clever and replied, There's some in the car, come and get it. 3 bottles. Come on, or I'll change my mind and leave. Mr. David was overjoyed at this good fortune and staggered after his guest, but he dashingly twisted the drunken man, buckled him in. locked the car door, and drove him to a private rehabilitation center outside the city. He specifically found an advert and phoned beforehand. He was firmly promised that they would cure alcoholism, even if the patient did not agree. However, they warned him that their methods were unconventional. That was all he could hope for, since Natalie had tried everything. On the way, Mr. David was screaming, raging, indignant, and didn't understand where they were taking him. On arrival, a huge, bulky orderly came out to them, tossed the screaming Mr. David over his shoulder as lightly as a piece of fluff, and said, "Don't worry, everything will be fine. We have such specialists. In a month, he'll be as good as a cucumber, and he won't want to drink." Christopher turned to Mr. David. "Sorry, mate, but I couldn't do it any other way. Natalie's in labor, and you're making her nervous, worrying that you're drinking. And that's strictly forbidden for her. I love her, so you know she wants what's best for you. I hope you'll come to your senses and wise up. Alcohol doesn't solve problems, and all the good you've got isn't the answer. I trust you'll realize that." When he told Natalie everything, she didn't even believe him. "You really did that for me. Thank you. It's my last hope. Maybe Mr. David will be persuaded to solve his problems, not go on a bender. I'd love to see him get his life back on track. He deserves it. But tell me, why are you doing all this? It's very expensive to stay in a center like this, I know. I mean, they're very harsh, shock therapy. But I've read that it helps a lot of people to rethink their lives." Christopher timidly took her hand for the first time and replied, "Because I love you. Haven't you realized that yet? And Kevin is crazy about you. I know this isn't the best time to say this, but I can't keep quiet. I don't want you to leave. Stay forever. I'm as ready to raise and love this baby as I am Kevin. Come on, you're torturing me. Answer me something." The woman was shocked. Christopher was looking at her like that. Everything turned over in her soul. Not so long ago, she thought she was going to be a single mother, that no one would want her. And now such a wonderful man was offering her his hand and heart. And most importantly, she felt the same way about the man, only she was afraid to admit it to herself. She got excited and quietly replied, "All right, if you want, I'll stay. But let's not hurry with the rest. Let everything be as it should be. I won't hide it. I like you a lot too. I like you more than that, but it's complicated. I'm just afraid you'll get bored with sleepless nights, nappies, screaming. And suddenly you won't be able to love someone else's baby. It happens. It's very difficult. You can't tell your heart what to do. And we don't know if Kevin will be happy to have another baby in his house. Maybe he'll get jealous. Who knows? Anyway, let's take our time." In the morning, Kevin woke up to the smell of chicken and baked goods. It was the only time their house had smelled like that since Mom had been alive. He immediately rushed into the kitchen. Natalie was fussing funny, so round in her apron, looking like a bear cub. And on the table were the poppy seed and cinnamon buns his mother had so often spoilt them with. The boy was so happy. "Aunt Natalie, what a delicious smell. I didn't even believe it. I thought I was dreaming. When did you come? After all, it's still so early." The girl sat the fidgety boy down at the table, poured tea with lemon, and replied, "Try it. Maybe your mums were tastier. But mind you, I did my best. I didn't leave. I decided yesterday that I'm going to live with you. Do you mind?" The boy munched on the pastries with gusto, sipped his tea, and smiled blissfully. "How delicious. It's great that you and Daddy are together. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, to be honest. You're just as good as Mummy. I'm going to wake Daddy up, or I'll eat it all before he wakes up." Just then, the owner of the house appeared on the kitchen doorstep. Christopher smiled, tousled his son's hair, kissed Natalie on the cheek, and said, "What a beauty. I had forgotten that mornings could be so beautiful. Natalie, what a good girl you are. It's my pleasure. Now it's my turn to make you happy. Let's have breakfast and go to the lake. It's so natural, the air is fresh. We'll have a picnic and relax. What do you think? I even bought a comfortable chaise longue especially for you." Natalie was very happy. It had been such a wonderful weekend. The holiday was in full swing. Christopher and Kevin were playing badminton and Natalie was sitting on the deck chair weaving a dandelion wreath. She wanted to get up to stretch her back and drink some water. And then she felt something warm running down her legs. She screamed in horror. "My darlings, we have to go now. I think I'm in labor. I'm in labor. Oh, it hurts so bad." Christopher was very anxious to get there in time. His hands were shaking. Kevin was also subdued and even a little scared. Mom used to moan like that when she was sick a lot, didn't she? What if Aunt Natalie was sick, too? Natalie tried to cheer up and not to scare the baby, saying that he would soon have a brother or sister and that everything would be fine. Christopher waved and kissed Natalie as she was led away to the labor ward. And then he and Kevin waited in the corridor of the maternity ward for a long time. Kevin even dozed off on his father's lap and refused to leave until they told him that Aunt Natalie had recovered. Finally, a nurse came out and cheerfully announced, "Congratulations, Daddy, you have a girl, all is well. The wait is good. Mummy is fine too. She needs to rest now, to sleep. So go home and don't torture your eldest son. Tomorrow you'll visit the woman in labor. Here's a list of what you need to bring." Christopher was as excited as if it were his own daughter. The next day he entered the room and looked at Natalie, her eyes shining with happiness. And next to her lay a baby, as if it were a doll's baby. The man first of all congratulated the mummy, kissed her tenderly on the cheek, took the baby in his arms, began to talk to her. "Hello, my darling. How small you are. I can't even believe it. I've already forgotten how to handle such little babies. What shall we call you? How about Annie or Kelly? Honey, what are we going to call our daughter? Have you thought of a name yet? I think Annie Moore sounds good, don't you think?" Natalie couldn't believe her ears and asked again, "Christopher, do you really want to put my daughter in your name? Are you sure? It's such a responsibility." The man replied, "Not yours, but ours. And I don't want to hear any more talk like that. I've already decided everything. We are one family now, and we have 2 children. That's it. I promise I'll never love any of them more or less, and I will never hurt my little girl. In fact, they say girls love their daddies more than their moms. So watch out, you'll be jealous." Natalie couldn't take it anymore. Tears dripped from her eyes. She hugged Christopher and whispered, "Thank you, my love. I'll be the best wife to you and a mum to Kevin. How's he doing? Was he all right last night? I had everyone worried. I was scared, even though I'm an EMT. Turns out being a mum is such a blessing. I want to tell everyone in the world about it. And my soul sings and my heart rejoices. I have never experienced such feelings in my life." The man replied, "He can't wait for his sister to come home. He even promised to share his toys. Tomorrow we will go with Kevin to choose a cot. We will buy everything we need for our princess. So don't worry. We'll have everything ready for her when she's discharged. With your arrival, Kevin is back to his old self, a fun and mischievous little boy. His eyes light up now. He can tell he likes you. And that makes me feel so good. As soon as you're discharged, we'll apply for a marriage license. But that's not all the surprises. You've got another visitor. I'm sure you'll be pleased. And you need to talk. I'll be off, and I'll see you tomorrow." Just then Mr. David entered the room. It was really impossible to recognize him, fresh, neat, well-dressed, smelling of expensive cologne. It was pleasant. Natalie splashed her hands. "Hello, David. Wow, it worked. A completely different person. Tell me, how did the doctors manage to change your mind? I was getting desperate." The man began to speak eagerly. "Oh, Natalie, at first, when I sobered up and realized where I was, I wanted to kill myself. The withdrawal was terrible. All the time I wanted to run away from there and have a glass. I was like a walking jelly. I was shaking like a jelly. All those tests, drips, procedures, if I disobeyed, I was in trouble. Their methods are really unconventional. I thought I couldn't take it. I'd break down. My nerves were shot. But the nurse there is so tough, you can't go easy on her. She kept scaring me with the enema. I was scared of her at first, and then I fell in love with her. You wouldn't believe it. Rachel took me to church. She took me to church. I spent a lot of time with the priest. He told me simple but important truths. That alcohol is from the evil one, a temptation, a human test. That the most important thing in life is family. And that if you love a man, you will never cheat on him, never hurt him. I'm sorry, Natalie. Now I realize what an old fool I was, trying to marry you, only to mess with your head. I'll be grateful to you for the rest of my life that you and Christopher helped me to get rid of this infection. And most importantly, to find my true love. I've been with so many women in my life, but I've never loved her so much, not only with my body, but with my soul. I'll put my arms around her at night, snuggle up to her, and I'll feel so peaceful. Now Rachel and I live there in the village. I'm a paramedic. I guess I needed a strict woman to keep me in line. She'd just give me a dirty look, raise an eyebrow, and that's it. I'd obey her. And what pies she bakes. She's a great hostess. Anyway, everything's fine with me now. I don't need money or positions. Rachel's there for me, and that's all that matters. And I also saw so much in that center, how the rich and successful from this 40-degree contagion to the very bottom, how their fates maimed and loved ones tormented. We had group therapy too, and everyone told themselves honestly. Sometimes it gave me goosebumps. And then there's Rachel's vegetable garden, and there's no end in sight. And everything is in perfect order. So I don't get to mess around anymore. I'm her first choice. I'm sure I won't slip up again. I'm starting a new life with a clean slate. I've been talking about myself, but I haven't told you the most important thing. Congratulations, Natalie, you have a beautiful daughter. And I think Christopher really loves you. So you got your tests wrong. And it turns out you've met your destiny. Natalie cried and replied, "Yes, David, I'm happy now. I have a real family now, a son Kevin and a daughter Annie, and a lover. And I'm very happy for you. I hope we'll be family friends. When you get discharged, we'll be home celebrating as a family. You should come round and meet Rachel, and we'll get to know her. It's interesting to see such a heroic woman." Life went on as usual, family, taking care of the children. The daughter has already started kindergarten, and Kevin is all grown up now. All the time he looked after his little sister, touchingly took care of her. After maternity leave, Natalie went back to work. Though Christopher did not insist, his earnings were more than enough to provide for the family. She remembered Joyce with dislike and decided that if she was going to be tormented by her again, she would give up everything and become a housewife. But things had changed on the ward. Both the managers and the head nurse were different. The girls were telling her the news. "Haven't you heard? We've had such an accident. Our Joyce has had it for all her sins. She was the one who wrote anonymous letters about Mr. David, accusing him of immoral behavior, and Mr. Nicholas Carter was put in his place. He was young, ambitious, and very cunning. Now you won't believe this, but our madam fell in love with him like a cat, and she went round and round about him, thinking we were blind. She started staying overtime. They all closed themselves in the office, supposedly for a meeting. And then an unprecedented scandal broke out. Mr. Nicholas's wife threw a tantrum right in the ward, shouting so much that patients ran out, and dragged our head nurse by the hair. Not only that, she posted a video online of the manager in his office with Joyce. What a sight. We were laughing so hard. You should have seen how thin that fat girl was in there. And there was a shortage of powerful prescription drugs. So we kicked both of those two lovebirds out in disgrace. Now we've got a great head nurse, Mrs. Charlotte. She can be tough, but at least she's fair. So don't worry, Natalie, you won't be bothered by any more of the old hags." Natalie listened with her mouth open and kept asking, "Wow. So, Joyce, what's that? Where is she now? Haven't you heard anything?" The girls immediately clamored. "Of course we have. Her husband divorced her after a scandal and had the child taken away by the court and moved to another town with him. And she herself has a serious illness, such that she can hardly stand up anymore. So Joyce paid for her nastiness in full. When Natalie heard the news, she was stunned. What a cruel fate had punished Joyce. Her first thought was, well, let her be punished. She drank so much of my blood and framed Mr. David. A couple of days later, she shared the news with Mr. David. She called him on the phone. He was silent for a long time, and then suddenly replied, "Well, Natalie, I don't agree with you there. Joyce was a decent bitch, of course, and she ruined a lot of people's lives. But there was a lot of truth in those complaints she made about me. I did flirt with the nurses, and the fact that I went on a bender, what's the big deal? She was right to scold you for those tests too, wasn't she? I'm not justifying her at all. She was obsessed with her career and achieved it by any means, sweeping away everything and everyone in her way. Well, who's without sin, right? I'm certainly not the one to judge her. So you do what you want, but I'll visit her in the hospice and do what I can to help. Resentment doesn't matter now. Oncology is a terrible ordeal, and I don't wish anyone to go through such an ordeal. The woman thought about it and decided to check on Joyce too. After all, we studied together, even if we never got along. What's the point of leaving a man in the lurch? So she and Mr. David went together to the hospice where poor Joyce lay. Her ex-husband had divorced her, and there were no other relatives to care for her. So there was a very young, still recently lush health lady no one needed. Both of them felt uncomfortable when they saw what was left of Joyce. A gray shadow. It was terrible to look at. Her face was sunken, and her eyes were sunken. Her hair was gone. When Joyce saw who came in, she looked angrily at the visitors and hurriedly threw her handkerchief over her head. Then she said, "What, are you two still together? Well, what a sweet couple. Have you come to mock? So you're enjoying it so much that I'm dying? The doctors say 3 months at most. That's it, you've done it. Now go away. No one needs me anymore, and I don't need anyone either." Natalie was so confused that she really wanted to run out of the room. But Mr. David had no intention of leaving. On the contrary, he sat down beside her, and despite Joyce's protests, took her hand in his and began to talk to her. "Joyce, don't be angry, don't shout. Hush, hush. We didn't come to mock you, honestly. We just heard about your trouble and decided to help. Just like that, from the bottom of our hearts, you know. Tell us, what can we do for you? Maybe bring you something, buy you something, or just talk to you. You say it, but don't shut up, please. You're like a compressed spring." Joyce sighed heavily, covered her face with her hands, and suddenly burst into tears. "How can you help me now? I'm doomed. I guess it's a punishment for all the evil I've done to people. I'm very guilty. I drove you, Mr. David, into the light. I scolded Natalie about everything. I've ruined my family. My son doesn't want to know me. My husband hates me. The worst thing is to lie in this stuffy ward 24 hours a day and live out my days alone like this." Natasha and Mr. David looked at each other. The woman said, "If it makes you feel any better, know that I hold no more grudges against you. That man, Christopher, who I messed up the labs for, is now my husband. We're happy." Mr. David suddenly suggested, "You know what, Joyce? Why don't we go to my place in the village? It's so natural there, the river. The air is clean. I'll talk to Rachel, she'll understand me. You'll live with us. I think it'll be easier for you. We've worked side by side for so many years, we're not strangers. Don't be sorry for your mistakes. It's all in the past anyway. The main thing is that you've realized," we thought. "Do you agree? Don't even worry, you won't embarrass us." Joyce looked at Mr. David dumbfounded and could not believe that he had forgiven her and was calling her to live with him. How could it be? But she said yes at once, for she had nothing to lose. Surprisingly, she did feel much better in the village with Mr. David's family. Rachel took her in well, trying to keep her mind off her heavy thoughts. Joyce even recovered a little, regained her strength, began to eat a little. She liked to walk in the pine grove or bask in the sun, admiring the flowers, couldn't breathe in the clean air. And only now she realized how beautiful the world around her was. She wanted to live so much. She thought, "God, how stupid I was. I dreamed about my career, chasing after it like an obsessive. I didn't appreciate what I have. My husband oppressed me. I paid little attention to my son. And then I decided to cheat. And I should have just lived, loved my loved ones. Do no evil, enjoy every moment, rejoice in every little thing. It's a pity that I realized it so late." Joyce was also eternally grateful to Mr. David and his wife for making her last day so warm. Vivian's fate had also turned out sadly. Eddie's involvement could not be proved and he was not jailed. But the woman got 5 years for attempted murder. Accustomed to living in luxury, eating delicacies, Vivian fell into a deep depression. At first she looked at her cellmates with squeamishness, who rigidly taught her their laws. At night she sobbed into her pillow and dreamed of revenge against Natalie, believing that she had ruined all her plans. After prison she became angry, her face was wrinkled. It was unclear how to go on living. She could barely get a job, even as a cleaner at a meat processing plant. But she had nowhere to live. No one wanted to rent her a place with a criminal record. She barely rented a room in the semi-basement of the hostel. It smelled of mold and cockroaches ran in packs. All the days were dreary and monotonous. She worked hard during the day, and in the evening she went to her den, drank and fell asleep. And there was no light. She wistfully remembered how well-fed and carefree she had once lived, how spectacular she had looked. Now she hated the mirror, couldn't look at her reflection. One day she made up her mind and stumbled drunkenly into Christopher's mansion. She was so drunk, she decided it was time for revenge. But she almost ran head-on into the family. Everyone was out of the car, and Kevin was holding the hand of a pretty little girl and speaking affectionately to her. "We're going to eat now. I have homework to do. You stay out of my way for now, okay? And then I'll play peekaboo with you. I promise." The girl nodded. She obeyed her older brother in everything. Sometimes, however, she was naughty, but he didn't scold her. He loved her very much. Natalie was talking to her husband, who was carrying bags. It was just a normal family conversation. "Honey, what can I make? Maybe some fish in a sauce. I'll make a casserole for the kids, okay?" Christopher answered something and looked at her fondly. It was obvious that there was harmony in the family. Vivian clenched her fists, kicked the rock, and walked away. She wanted revenge, but what was the use? Christopher would never love or forgive her like that anyway. She drank again and felt sorry for herself, realizing that her own life had become so miserable through her own fault. Natalie and her husband often thought back to those tests, which had been the beginning of their acquaintance, which had led to a happy and strong marriage. Having overheard a strange conversation at her grandfather's funeral, Xusha hurried to the old apple tree and barely ... in P4. As to what Sabrina hated sad funeral ceremonies. Well, of course, no one asked her permission to live or go beyond the boundary from which no one could return. Right now, she knew as soon as she saw Charlotte on her smartphone screen. She knew it was bad news from her neighbor. "Sabrina, hello, darling." Charlotte's voice came through. "It's Aunt Charlotte calling. I'm sorry to break the bad news to you this morning, but your father's phone isn't working, so I've had to break it to you. Vincent died recently. I go to work and I see him doing something under the apple tree, half turned towards the street. I'm waving at him. Vincent, good morning. Godspeed. I asked him what he was doing early in the morning. Was he raking or picking up fallen fruit? And Vincent had no emotion. He didn't even move. Though you know my voice is loud, it's impossible not to hear it. So I went to the gate, opened the latch, came up to Vincent, and he wasn't breathing. I'm sitting here on the porch, and I've called all the services, except the funeral parlor. It's not up to me to see Vincent off. But Sabrina, honestly, I have to go to work. Would you come?" Sabrina replied in a husky voice. "Of course, Aunt Charlotte. I'm leaving now. I'll be there in about 30 minutes. The sad news that her paternal grandfather had passed his last frontier came as a shock to Sabrina. Vincent, always cheerful, was something she hadn't expected. She had to go, of course, organize everything, call everyone in her grandfather's phone book. But she wanted to convince herself, shiveringly, that this conversation with her neighbor was just a bad dream. Now I should open my eyelids wide and look at the call history. Make sure the call never happened. Unfortunately, that hope was not realized. There had indeed been a call from Aunt Charlotte, and Sabrina did her best to get to her grandfather's cottage, which was technically located within the big city but in the private sector. As soon as she got into the taxi, Sabrina asked her boss for time off. Then she had a short conversation with a colleague in the office, explaining where the documents were, for which, as it turned out, today clients had to come. The most difficult call the girl did not dare to make: how to inform her parents that they have to cancel a trip abroad to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the wedding, that they had to return urgently to say goodbye to Grandpa Vincent. Sabrina felt sad. What an unexpected tragedy. She'd spoken to her grandfather just the day before yesterday, and he'd told her he was expecting her to visit. He asked her to come soon, not for the sake of tending a small vegetable garden, but to consult on something. Sabrina promised him a weekend, which had recently passed. She could well have visited her grandfather, but she was a little ill, postponed the visit, apologized. They chatted for a while about nothing. Grandpa Vincent recalled the way his wife Shirley, Sabrina's grandmother, had always done things. The girl heard that she should brew linden blossom, wait until the infusion cooled to a pleasant warmth, stir a spoonful of honey into a glass of the healing liquid, drink it, and lie down under a blanket. She promised that she would heal herself and then visit him. And in the first month of autumn, when she was scheduled to go on holiday, Sabrina promised to stay with him for at least a week. God, what a shame, Sabrina thought now, regretting that she was going to wait for a holiday. After all, it took about 45 minutes to get to her grandfather by public transport. When there were no traffic jams on the roads, it was possible to head not home after work, but to a loved one who had lived a little over a year and was incredibly bored alone. All the more embarrassing was the fact that Sabrina was free and could keep her lonely grandfather company, traveling to and from work, even by taxi, more expensive than public transport, but quick and comfortable. Alternatively, Sabrina could simply leave the house a little earlier to walk in the private sector to the transport stop where the tram of the desired route departed. Everything would absolutely have been solved, somehow managed and sorted out. But she had not had the foresight to realize that Grandpa Vincent required care and supervision, and that his requests to come were not a mere whim, but the wishes of a lonely elderly man. Sabrina felt an agonizing sense of shame. And sighing, she tried to call her parents. However, both her dad's and mom's number were out of range. The girl had to send an email, hoping that the unpleasant news would not be read too late after solving the rest of the issues. The time on the journey to her grandfather's house flew by. Sabrina stepped out of the taxi and, after listening to Aunt Charlotte's sympathy, felt a real grief come over her. Her neighbor hugged the girl who had arrived, told her to hang in there, and ran to work. Sabrina looked at her grandfather and waited for him to get up, pull himself up and call her into the house or into the arbor with grapes. However, the miracle did not happen. The neighborhood services that arrived on the call conducted another ritual associated with the passing of the older generation. The paramedic pronounced Vincent dead, presumably from a heart attack. She advised Sabrina to contact the funeral agencies and explain that they had specialists who could organize grieving procedures with due respect for the deceased and sympathy for his relatives. Sabrina heeded the advice and tried with all her might to hold back the bitter tears of despair. It was not until dinner time that the girl was alone. Sabrina entered her grandfather's house, crying when she saw the phone on the table, which he had apparently forgotten on his last morning. Probably if he had had the mobile phone, he would have been able to call somewhere and ask for help. But there was no changing the past. Things just happened the way they did. The girl had discovered the hiding place that Grandpa Vincent and Grandma Shirley had told her about shortly after she came of age. The man then pulled back the rug hanging over the bed, pressed gently on one of the wooden panels, then with a slight movement slid it aside. Surprised, the girl saw a deep vertical niche. Grandfather explained, "Here, granddaughter, these are our funeral ones. Shirley and I have been quietly putting money in here, so as not to be a burden to anyone." Sabrina remembered how she had started nagging her grandparents back then, said it was too early for them to be thinking about such a topic. She assured them they'd have great-grandchildren to nurse. "No, my dears, that won't do. First, you'll have to consider my fiancé approve, and then you'll have to help raise the babies. Mummy and Daddy are always busy." Grandmother, stroking her smiling granddaughter's head, quietly objected. "Sabrina, it's not like we're asking you if it's too early to think about your last journey in this world or not. We're just showing you so you know just in case. After all, Vincent's 70th birthday is this year. And I'm a little younger. Alas, at that age, anything can happen. Your parents know about the stash, of course. What if they're shy or modest?" Grandpa Vincent supported his wife. "We don't want to be a burden to you. Well, let's get this conversation over with. Grandmother hurriedly changed the subject and began to talk about the amusements of a little kitten she had picked up, unpretentiously nicknamed Man. Now, 6 years after this conversation, the skinny little boy has turned into a well-fed, long-haired, and independent handsome. His owner's departure was a real shock to the animal, and he even lost his excellent appetite for a few days. However, Grandpa Vincent managed to bring the cat out of this state, and now this mission fell to the share of Sabrina. It seemed to Sabrina that the orphaned cat understands everything, and that's why he curled up in a ball on his grandfather's bed and doesn't even react to the sound of the refrigerator door opening. The agency recommended by the ambulance lady really turned out to be professional. A serious man suggested Sabrina to organize a farewell not at home, but in a special ritual hall at the cemetery. It was much easier to get there than here, in the private sector. And the house, though big, would still be cramped. There is no fuss and crowding. The hall there is convenient, comfortable, said the man. Everyone will be able to say goodbye quietly, and without the crush that usually accompanies the removal from the flat or house. Everything will be touching and civilized. Besides, it will save you a lot of trouble. Sabrina thought it was a reasonable suggestion, but she had to spend not only her meager savings but also Vincent's grandfather's stash to pay for the funeral. She did everything necessary, as if in a daze, waiting for her parents to arrive, or at least to reply to an email, but in vain. Sabrina contacted the hotel where they had booked the room, but as she understood from the reply in broken English, Mr. and Mrs. Robinson did not check in. They explained that they had decided to change their plans slightly. Sabrina was worried about her parents, but there was nothing she could do. Clods of earth began to fall on Grandpa Vincent's coffin lid, but neither his son nor daughter-in-law showed up. It was Sabrina who received the condolences and sympathy, and she had to listen to the lamentations of the distant relatives who had come to see the old man off. Some unashamedly spoke out about the irresponsible son and daughter-in-law who did not attend the mournful event. The girl defended her parents as best she could, and the guardians of other people's morals were silent for a while, transferring the conversation to other topics. Gradually, only relatives and the closest of neighbors remained at the memorial table in a small cafe. Sabrina, who had last seen most of them just under a year ago at Grandma Shirley's farewell, could hardly stand all the questioning. She wanted to run away from the cafe, but she had to fulfill her duty as a granddaughter to the end. From time to time, she took out the dirty dishes and brought memorial treats along with the waiters. As long as she didn't have to sit at the table listening to the loud conversations of those gathered. By chance, Sabrina overheard part of a conversation between Aunt Charlotte and Grandpa Michael's cousin as they served another batch of pies. Vincent used to talk to that apple tree like a person sometimes. I told him when Shirley was alive that we should cut that useless tree down, Michael said. It's grown over the roof of the house, and you can't get apples for nothing. Shirley, God rest her soul, used to complain about how useless that tree was. One year it bore so much fruit that you'd be tired of putting it away. The next year it didn't bear a single fruit. She kept threatening to cut it down and plant some summer tree like a peach. Only Vincent, a blessed memory, always stood up for the apple tree. Aunt Charlotte nodded in agreement. You're right. I thought it was strange, too, Vincent's fondness for that old apple tree. If it was a hectare of land, it wouldn't be too much of a waste of space. But in such a small area, it seemed silly to leave such a huge tree. A snippet of conversation made Sabrina think. Indeed, grandfather treated that apple tree as a living thing. The girl had often seen him affectionately stroking the bark of the tree as he passed by. One day when Sabrina was a child, she decided to play and climbed up on a branch, which broke under her weight. Grandfather Vincent left his granddaughter in his wife's care and began to treat the wound on the tree himself. Lately, after Grandma Shirley's death, Grandpa had preferred to rest alone under the apple tree, rather than in the specially built gazebo covered with grapes. Thoughts of the mysterious apple tree Vincent had singled out briefly receded before the sad worries. The relatives were the last to leave the rented hall, and Michael reminded Sabrina. Someone has to spend 40 days and nights at Vincent's house. Would you be okay alone until your parents showed up? Maybe I should send someone with you. At least take my Tracy, my youngest daughter, with you. Sabrina noticed the look on Tracy's face, a woman of about 35 who clearly had her own plans for the evening and had no desire to spend the night in a place she didn't know. "Thank you, but I can really manage on my own. After all, it's kind of a token of my respect for my grandfather." Saying goodbye to everyone, the girl hurried home from the public transport stop, as her relatives had to go in different directions. Barely opening the gate of her grandfather's house, Sabrina had time to regret that she had tried to create an image of an independent and strong person. Of course, she wasn't too young to be afraid of an empty house, but she'd already spent a few nights here all alone. Would she be able to cope? She began to ponder again the reason why the tree held such an important place in her relative's life. Pensively, the girl stroked the sad cat. But being in the house, even in the company of an animal, was somehow uncomfortable for her. Sabrina went out into the yard and, obeying a sudden impulse, approached the apple tree, on which somewhere high hung green small fruits. A chill ran down her back. When she saw the scratches on the ground, there was no doubt that Grandpa Vincent had left those marks. It got really creepy when Sabrina had the crazy thought that the dying old man was digging up the ground, not in agony, but trying to dig up something. The girl went to the barn, took a small garden trowel from there, and returning to the apple tree, began to carefully dig into the ground. Almost immediately, the trowel hit something hard. Sabrina began to dig with the utmost care and soon pulled out of the shallow hole a hard rectangular package wrapped in a bag and additionally sealed with duct tape. The girl had never heard any stories about family heirlooms and was truly shocked. At home, Sabrina laid an old towel on the table, already asking for a well-deserved rest somewhere in a landfill. She laid her find on it and carefully opened the package with the kitchen knife her grandfather always kept sharp. Beneath the layers of duct tape in the package was a metal candy box. The girl held her breath as she opened it and saw not jewelry or money inside, but papers. Sabrina scrutinized the contents of the box. There were envelopes underneath double-folded notebooks, clearly written in her grandmother's smooth handwriting. Judging by the fact that the package was quite modern, with the emblem of a chain supermarket, and the paper was neither frayed nor yellowed, the girl concluded that the find had not been in the ground long. Thinking that it wouldn't be a big deal if she knew what Grandpa Vincent had tried to dig up before he died, Sabrina began to study the find, turning first to Grandma Shirley's notes. "My dear Vincent, I am writing you this note of confession, realizing that I do not have much time left in the world, and that it is wrong to take this secret away with me. Forgive me, Vincent, for the deception and even the crime I committed many years ago because of my love for you. It's hard to confess, but I must. You and I were married then, my daughter was in kindergarten, and I was back at work at the post office. Everything was going so well, I was jealous of myself. And then, like a blow to the head, I sorted through the mail and saw a letter addressed to you. The sender was one Marian Lopez from Center City, Texas. I got a bad feeling in my heart. I didn't give it to you. I read it myself. That's how I found out about your affair while you were digging up virgin land in Kansas. Your ex wrote that it was her strict father who arranged your separation in 1964, threatened to kill you or put you in jail using his connections for having an underage relationship. In fact, he left her only option was to lie to your eyes that she didn't love you one bit and didn't want to see you again. The mother tried to stand up for her daughter, but it didn't help. The woman was simply beaten by her own husband for daring to interfere. When Marian saw what your father had done, she was terrified for you. That's why she said what she was told to say with conviction. After this brutal confession, you predictably flared up, packed your things, took an apple sapling as a souvenir for your parents, and returned home. She wrote that she was pregnant by you, and to hide the sin, she was married without official registration in the registry office to some widower, with many children in a remote settlement that did not even have a name. I read Marian's letter in the dark, and even began to empathize with your young lover. She complained that her family life had failed. The man she had to live with treated her like a servant. Marian named her baby girl, your daughter, after her mother, Cheryl, despite the scandals with her in-laws. The unfortunate young mother was literally enslaved. She endured beatings, humiliation, and relentlessly planned her escape. When her daughter grew up, Marian found it even harder. The native children of this so-called husband began to abuse the girl, and her mother could not say a word in her defense. The beating started right away. It was only after 5 years that Marian managed to escape from her husband. She did not give details, but from the blurred letters from the spilled tears, it was clear it was very difficult. Marian asked you to come and fetch her and her daughter at this very center. She said she would wait for you. When I read the letter, it was as if I'd gone blind and deaf all at once. I didn't know how I was supposed to go on. Giving you the message meant losing my family. We only had a 3-year-old daughter. How could I take away her father with my own hands? How would she grow up without you? I confess, I destroyed that first letter, threw it in the oven. I thought I was protecting my family. I was wrong. Marian continued to send letters. The next one came almost a year later. Apparently she was timing it so you'd hear from her and her daughter on your birthday, asking why you didn't answer her. How could I have been afraid that she'd pack up and come to you? It's not that far, maybe a little over 300 miles. Or something like that. So we're almost next door to someone who could ruin my life. If I can burn the letters, it's the people that's more difficult. What am I supposed to do with a woman and a child? I started to think how I could keep them away from you. I wrote a letter, copying your handwriting and your name just in case. I promised I'd come as soon as I could. You probably don't remember how I persuaded you to move, but you wouldn't agree. So I lived like a volcano. I didn't know how to protect my happiness, how to save it if you found out the truth about your daughter. I didn't take holidays or sick leave with Wilfred at work because of it. Then you realized 5 years later that it's only once a year that woman bothers you. I felt a little better. I burned the letters for a long time for a few years. Then I felt as if I was ashamed. I started hiding them. I knew there were places in the house you'd never think of going. The only thing was that I couldn't leave my post office because of my fears, and I refused the post at the main post office. But that's all right, I got used to it. How long did I write to you? But I saved only 10 messages with the last letter, which came from Beaverton in 1994, and I did a mean thing. In it, Marian wrote that her health was failing, that she needed medication. And although Cheryl was trying to support her, she was always short of money. Obviously, it was a time when people were scared and unstable. The whole country was in a fever. Marian didn't ask for anything for herself. But of course I couldn't be completely calm. What if she came to our land? What if she decided to see you? I sealed the envelope carefully and returned it with the note the addressee has dropped out. After that, the stream of letters from Marian dried up. I wish I'd done that before. I don't know. It wouldn't have been a problem in the first place. Now I don't know what to do with the letters. In fairness, you should read them, but not while I'm alive. So when you hear the bitter story of Marian and your daughter, I'll be gone. Forgive my selfishness, but I could not have done otherwise. I loved you too much, and I didn't want to leave my son without a father. I don't care anymore. Wilfred's all grown up and my granddaughter's a bride. So the way to Marian is clear. I only ask you to wait at least a year after I'm gone before you look for your first love and a daughter you've never seen. Endure this period of mourning in honor of all that was good between us. And then do what your heart tells you to do. Forgive me for everything. Loving you, Shirley. Sabrina was shocked to read the note. The story of tragic love, years of deception and hard confession touched her. Involuntarily, the girl thought that perhaps Grandma Shirley should have kept her secret forever. And on the other hand, realized that it was too cowardly. Of course, it was easier to judge from the outside than to find oneself in such a stalemate. And Sabrina couldn't imagine what she would have done in her grandmother's shoes. Would she have told her lawful husband that her friend still loved him and was waiting for him, together with their daughter? Or would she have tried to shield him from this literally amazing information by any means imaginable? It was clear to Sabrina what Grandpa Vincent wanted to talk to her about. Surely, as the year's grace period that Grandma Shirley had asked him for was coming to an end, he wanted advice on how to find his long-lost lover. It had been a long time, and it was possible that Marian had long since changed her common surname, Lopez. Her daughter Cheryl, Sabrina, and her father's blood sister could also be married. Trying to distract herself from the unexpected information she had received, Sabrina folded the leaves back into the box and put it in the wardrobe, not daring to read the letters Marian had sent to her grandfather just yet. The girl subconsciously feared that some more details of her loved one's private life might be revealed. Grandpa Vincent was languishing alone, except for the fact that his old dog Buddy was napping next to him. It was boring, so Sabrina started cleaning, though it wasn't really necessary. She took out a bucket of dirty water to splash it in the far corner of the plot, where the rose was still modestly green, but which would be covered with a scattering of golden buds in autumn. And she saw a car pull up to the gate. Sabrina's parents, who had finally returned from abroad, got out of the car, and she was incredibly happy. Even if this meeting was with a touch of bitterness, but at least the excitement for her parents had receded. In the course of a confusing conversation, it became clear that they had traveled to a place where there was no communication or internet access. They had received a sad message from Wilfred and Patricia's daughter when they reached civilization just before Grandpa Vincent's funeral and had hurried back. However, they were still late. Sabrina was relieved that she now had the support she so desperately needed. After hugs and tears, when everyone was already at the table, she began to tell her father and mother about the unusual find. The girl took the box out of the cupboard to prove her words. Together with her parents, she once again read aloud Grandma Shirley's handwritten confession. Then they studied the surviving letters. In one of them was a picture from the photo studio. It showed two pretty girls who looked only remotely like Kansas natives. The two beauties were clearly related in appearance, but they looked more like sisters with a slight age difference. The inscription on the back of the photograph, however, indicated that they were Grandpa Vincent's first love and their mutual daughter Cheryl. In beautiful handwriting it was inscribed, "In memory of my beloved Vincent from Marion and Cheryl on her 16th birthday. We hope to see you again. 1981. Wilfred, forgetting his respectability, even whistled. Yeah, to say I'm surprised is to say nothing at all. How did Mum manage to keep it all a secret and not give away her knowledge for so many years? I have no idea." Patricia, with whom her mother-in-law had a marvelous relationship, was also puzzled. Against all notions of family life, they had had so many heart-to-heart talks. But Shirley had never said a word about the fact that somewhere far away her official husband had a lover and an illegitimate daughter. It wasn't easy to come to terms with such news. Patricia asked, "Wilfred, do you think we should find your sister and her mother? If she's still alive, of course, or should we let things stay as they are?" The man himself didn't know how he should react to what was happening. From what he had learnt from his daughter, his father wanted the secret of his youth to be known. On the other hand, was it ethical to intrude into the fate of a woman who was a stranger, but a blood relative? She appears to be in her late 50s, and this Marion herself is probably in her 70s now. Reminiscing about her difficult youth and the man she once loved so much but never waited for could be detrimental to her health. Plus, as Shirley's grandmother wrote, after she sent the letter marked addressee dropped out back, they stopped coming altogether. That could mean both that Marion believed the lie and that she was desperate. Alas, however, the most unfavorable events in the fate of a woman and her daughter could also have happened. Sabrina said, as if voicing her thoughts aloud. Still, it seems to me that we should at least try to find Grandfather's daughter, just to sort of rehabilitate him. After all, it's not Grandpa Vincent's fault that things turned out this way. I think it's only fair that the whole truth be known to Marion, and of course Cheryl. Sabrina said. Listen, Daddy turned the girl to Wilfred. How do you feel knowing you have an older sister, a blood sister? Do you feel like seeing her, socializing with her? The man was confused and asked his daughter himself in response. And you, Sabrina? Cheryl is your aunt, by the way. So you're curious to meet her, then? Sabrina listened to herself and admitted, curious, and a little scared. The family was divided. Patricia, after listening to her husband and daughter, declared, I think we should leave things the way they are. There's no point in disturbing something that has long since healed. More than half a century has passed. Maybe Marion is happy with another man. And here we are greeting, so to speak, relatives. I don't think it's quite right. A long conversation did not help to find a compromise. In addition, all the family members themselves were not sure of the correctness of their thinking. In the end, the Robinsons went to bed so they could visit Vincent's final resting place in the morning. Sorry I'm late, Papa Wilfred whispered, standing by the freshly wreath-covered mound. Never realized I wouldn't see you again. The man placed 4 scarlet carnations on the empty spot and bowed his head, hiding his tears. After Wilfred, his daughter-in-law and granddaughter placed flowers on Vincent's grave. Each of the grieving relatives realized that they were subconsciously waiting for a sign of what to do with the information that had come upon them. They did not speak of it aloud, but Wilfred, Patricia, and Sabrina were all waiting for a revelation to come upon them. Perhaps it was naive and foolish, but they wanted to know what Vincent wanted. As much as the Robinsons hoped for a clue, they couldn't get one. It was with heavy hearts that they returned to the flat. They decided that Wilfred would stay in the house for the time being, and his wife and daughter would visit him in their spare time. While Patricia helped her husband to pack at least a minimum of necessary things, Sabrina hurried to the nearest shop to buy for the grieving man some particularly tasty food. She felt sorry for the cat, who seemed to have lost his luster and appetite. After consulting with a serious-looking woman, who gave the trolley bags of wet food, Sabrina gave her grandfather's pet some goodies and returned home, holding out a bag of food to her father. Man is a little cranky right now and may refuse the food the girl asked. Try feeding him from the palm of your hand. He usually starts eating as a sign of respect. Wilfred smiled at his daughter. Don't worry, I won't hurt you. You'll brag about your cat. The days flew by. Sabrina and her mother Patricia went to work, and in the evenings they talked about everything, as the girls had been used to since their early childhood. Of course, they also talked about the secret that Grandma Shirley had kept hidden for so many years. On the 9th day, they decided to hold the wake of Vincent's soul at his house. It seemed like the right thing to do. There seemed to be fewer people than in the cafe after the funeral. But the fact that Patricia had decided to make the cakes herself instead of ordering them from a bakery as a sign of respect for her father-in-law had made Sabrina tired and Sabrina tired and Sabrina tired. But the memorial treats turned out unusually tasty, as if someone from above helped to cook. They sat together heartily, remembering various incidents from the past. Wilfred gently tried to ask his great-uncle, "Michael, is there anything you can tell me about Daddy's youth?" The older man was happy to talk and spoke in a sing-song voice. Vincent was always brave for any good cause, responsive and determined. When he came back from the army, he went to the factory to get a job in the personnel department. As his mother told me later, he heard from someone that young people from our town were going to the Virgin Lands. It was not a novelty then. The film about the dashing guy had already come out, very inspiring. And in general, everything was on the rise. Everyone wanted to help the country. It was a united effort, and Vincent, after returning from compulsory service, decided that he would be more useful there, on the Virgin Lands. I admit, wanted to go with him, but where would I go? I was only 15 years old at the time. Vincent was 5 to 6 years older than me. So he went to Kansas. He learned to drive a truck in the Army and got his license. He came back almost 5 years later. He brought back some seedlings as a memento of his long business trip. Of course, he had changed during this time. He was a naive, idealistic boy. He came back practically a grown man. Not because he was my kin, but to be fair, Vincent had not become worse. You'd be hard-pressed to find a man like that these days. Golden hands and a decent character. They welcomed him here at the car factory with open arms. Non-drinker, hard worker, honest. What else can you ask for? He's greedy for work. And so he'd take off his last shirt and give it to someone else. Oh, the men respected him. He never refused anything they asked him. And women were crazy about him. And he was very respectful to everyone. Then he got married on holidays. She worked at the post office, and one day the company car broke down. Vincent was driving by and couldn't leave his colleague in the lurch. That's how they met. They met briefly and got married. It was a small wedding. My mom even resented it, as if it was a shame. But when you were born, Wilfred, that's when Vincent got excited. There was a big party in the courtyard family, neighbors and colleagues. Everyone was invited. There didn't seem to be any delicacies on the table, but that wasn't the main thing. The atmosphere is much more important. Yes, there was a time when all the neighbors were almost like relatives. Michael interrupted his memories to quench his thirst with a cool, tasty compote. Although there was nothing new he had learnt that the Robinsons didn't know, it was still nice to hear the kind words about Vincent. After Wilfred, Patricia, and Sabrina were the only ones left in the house, the female side of the family cleaned up, leaving the only man, save for the cat, to sort out the makeshift benches. Tired Sabrina went to bed on her favorite cot and had a strange, incredibly realistic dream. The girl was not even frightened when she saw her grandfather Vincent in his favorite Japanese woman. The man stood under the tree, gently stroking the bark and looking at his granddaughter, asking, "As the apples ripen, take a few and give them to those you knew. Don't forget, Sabrina, please don't forget." Grandpa Vincent looked away, as if trying to see what was happening over his granddaughter's shoulder. Sabrina turned around to see what or who the man was interested in, but it was empty. When the girl's gaze returned to the apple tree, the grandfather was no longer under the crown. Outside the window, the wind whistled and birds sang, pulling Sabrina out of her dream, which had left a vivid impression. There was no doubt that Grandpa Vincent had sent word, the sign she needed to make the right decision. Of course, he had made his wish clear. At his request, Sabrina would have to make a trip from the other side of the world in the autumn, so that her grandfather's longtime lover and their common daughter would know the truth. Shocked, Sabrina did not hide from her parents that she had seen Grandpa Vincent in a dream. Wilfred was even a little annoyed that the late Papa had visited his granddaughter, not him, in his dreams. But the wise Patricia supported both husband and daughter. It was the right thing to do. Out there, beyond the realm of reality, there must be rules. On the eve of the holiday, the whole family was busy preparing for Sabrina's upcoming trip. The girl's attempts to find Cheryl on social networks were unsuccessful, although she patiently browsed through hundreds of user pages from all over the world, not just her home state. Sabrina planned to leave on the first day of her holiday, so as not to delay the decision on the issue, which was already delayed for many years by the will of her grandmother Shirley. The girl's parents, trying not to betray their excitement, helped their daughter to pack. They were most responsible for the forthcoming transport of apples, which Sabrina had dreamed her grandfather had ordered her to take with her. Patricia placed a rectangular plastic basket without a handle in a rather compact but capacious gym bag. She carefully stacked the ripe fruit there, laying each layer with parchment paper on her husband's advice, and the main load, carefully covered with a towel, was packed. Sabrina added the minimum number of items to her bag and set off on her journey. At the girl's request, her parents only walked her to the taxi. Although the daughter promised to call and report the results of the search, Patricia and Wilfred were worried about their daughter. It was not at all certain that the search expedition would be a success, and a meeting with a woman from Vincent's past could lead to unpredictable results. Thanks to a carefully planned route and the absence of any unforeseen circumstances, Sabrina had no trouble reaching the town where Vincent's grandfather had received letters for so long, some of which he had been able to read only after his wife's death. The town seemed to her to be a rather cozy settlement. The coming autumn had already touched the trees with gold and made it especially picturesque. Private houses were peacefully neighboring with apartment buildings, near which there were small vegetable gardens and even polycarbonate greenhouses. The girl approached the house whose address was written on the envelope. There was an intercom on the door of the 5-story building, and Sabrina hesitated for a few seconds. Although she had prepared herself morally for the trip, and even prepared a small speech before the difficult explanation, she suddenly became afraid. Overcoming herself, Sabrina dialed the number of the flat she was interested in on the keypad. "Hi. Excuse me, can I speak to Marian Lopez and her daughter Cheryl, please?" she asked, hearing a pleasant female voice coming from the speaker. "Come in," came from the speaker, and the door opened. Sabrina was greatly surprised that the stranger whose voice came from the speaker did not ask her name or the purpose of her visit, but there was no time to ponder. Breathing deeply to calm herself, the girl went up to the first floor, where a not-yet-old woman was waiting for her behind the open door. Shirley gazed at her face, but tried in vain to recognize Cheryl in the stranger, considering that the photograph showed her at the young age of 16. And more than 3 decades had passed, it was unlikely that such a dramatic change had taken place. Outwardly, the woman was of a very different type, and she looked about 40 years old, maybe a little more. How could one tell the age of a modern, self-conscious woman, which the stranger was undoubtedly? Sabrina said a friendly hello. "Hello again. I'm the one who bothered you. Could you please tell me how to speak to Marian Lopez?" The woman carried on the conversation freely, even friendly, as if she had known Sabrina for years. Hello, if you're not joking. Where are you from?" The question surprised Sabrina, but she answered honestly, though she didn't see how it mattered. The woman, hearing the name of the town, softened, and invited her into the flat, where she asked another strange question. "What are your grandfather's last names?" "My grandfather's last name on my dad's side is Robinson, and on my mum's side it's Jackson," was a phrase that had a strange effect on the woman. She asked nothing more, fidgeting. In spite of Sabrina's excuses, she led her into the kitchen and moved a plate of delicious, ruddy cakes. She offered tea, coffee, homemade compote, and holding out a glass of the sweet drink to her guest, explained. "Marion was my mum's best friend. Cheryl was my nanny and big sister. We survived together, even when there was nothing to eat but potatoes grown in the wasteland. We only saw meat once in a while. When Aunt Marion was planting, she was so worried and afraid, and hoped that one day they'd be looking for her. She told my mum to tell no one how to find her and her daughter, except a man named Robinson or his descendants. She was very fond of one Vincent Robinson. A daughter is a daughter, the fruit of their love sinful and sweet." "Yes, that's right. Vincent Robinson is my grandfather," Sabrina confirmed the rejoinder. "He was my grandfather. He passed away recently. It was only afterwards that it came to light that he once had his first love and their shared daughter living here in your flat at this very address. It's not Grandpa Vincent's fault he didn't find them sooner. It's just the way things are." The landlady took a notebook out of the cupboard, tore out a piece of paper, took a pen, and flicked through the pages. She began to rewrite something, not forgetting to be cordial. "Are you eating? Drink. You came straight here from the railway station, didn't you? Have some refreshment. You'll have to go to Sacramento to meet Marion or Tracy, to meet again. And you didn't move." We had to, even though it was incredibly hard to part with each other. It was almost like we were family. But after Aunt Marion ran into an acquaintance of the man who kept her as cheap labor, I was afraid to stay here. It's easier to get lost in a big city. Here, I wrote down their address and Cheryl's phone number for you to make an appointment. Knowing Aunt Marion, I'm sure she's still waiting to hear from her beloved Vincent. But it's better if you and Cheryl call. Arrange a time and place to meet at their place, not too well in the house. The daughter's husband is a real creep. The first time I saw him, I was scared. A man standing there, smiling at you, but his eyes were contemptuous and evil. As Aunt Charlotte told me later, he helped her daughter a lot when she got a new job in town, and she fell in love without noticing any of his faults. When she did, it was too late, like a fly caught in a spider's web. No matter how hard Aunt Charlotte tries to keep him away from her daughter, she just can't seem to do it. Alice was silent. Apparently she herself was troubled by the situation, but she didn't know how to help the woman she considered practically her sister. Sabrina tried not to look hungry, but she couldn't refuse the tasty treat. She belatedly remembered the rules of etiquette. "Excuse me, my name is Sabrina. Thank you so much. Your pies are delicious and your compote is wonderful." The woman was very sweetly embarrassed. "Oh, come on, that's good." Alice pounced with questions. "My name is Alice. And please don't use you to me, it makes me uncomfortable. By the way, Aunt Marion taught me how to cook. She's really good at cooking. Listen, Sabrina, do you have any money for the journey? The taxi fare will be insane, but it's faster than the train. I'm sorry it's not much, but I can give you 1,030. Sabrina was struck to the core by this offer. Some Alice, a seemingly quite modern young woman, in her simple-minded and open demeanor was like the positive characters from the old films that grandparents loved to watch. Such goodwill made Sabrina's nose pinch, and she hurried to reassure Alice. "Don't worry, my finances are fine. Thank you, Alice. I'm very pleased to meet you. Thank you for the treats. It's time to move on." Sabrina looked up the cost of a taxi to her destination on the app and sighed. "Yes, you're right. The price is something unbelievable. That's okay. I'll gladly take the electric train." Alice didn't let her guest off that easily. "Wait, let's look at the schedule of trains and trains passing by on the internet. Maybe we'll even book a ticket at once. Otherwise, why are you wasting your time in the waiting room? You better keep me company here. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you?" Sabrina nodded, agreeing with Alice's wisdom. But the caution was unnecessary. It turned out that with time to get to the train station, it was almost time to say goodbye to the hospitable woman. Almost out of the flat, Sabrina hesitated briefly. Opening her bag, she pulled out several large, flavorful apples and held them out to Alice. "These are apples from Grandpa's garden. They're delicious. I don't know how else to thank you for such a warm welcome." Alice was embarrassed again, but accepted the apples. "I can't resist such incredible flavor and beauty. They're just like a picture. Say hi to Cheryl. By the way, with your permission, I think I'll let her know you're going over there. Let her get Aunt Marian ready, or she might have a blood pressure spike or a heart attack or something." Sabrina had no objections, and bidding her new acquaintance a warm farewell, she went to the railway station. She sent her parents a detailed account of how she had been met by the helpful Alice. She told them that Marian and Cheryl had moved, but she had their new address. Her mum, who was clearly worried about her daughter, replied almost instantly and asked her to be careful on the road. The girl light-heartedly promised to look around carefully and not to get involved in any dubious ventures. Fortunately, the atmosphere in the carriage was quite calm. Some of them were gazing thoughtfully out of the window at the scenery, which was becoming less and less recognizable in the darkness. Some of the occasional fellow travelers were dozing, and Sabrina wished she could be as immersed in her smartphone as most of the passengers in the carriage. The charging level made it necessary to refrain from that luxury. Almost at the moment when the departing day crosses the boundary of night to be forever in the past, Sabrina found herself in an ancient town. The girl thought with belated regret that she hadn't realized to take care of booking a hotel room in advance. After all, to appear in Marian's flat at such a late hour was somehow quite awkward. She felt a little uncomfortable, but ordering herself not to be a coward, she quickly, before the smartphone finally ran out of battery, orientated herself how to get to the nearest hotel. Luck favored Sabrina. The receptionist, smiling, even as if sincere, offered a small but, according to her, very cozy room. Sabrina was soon settled into her temporary accommodation, and after putting her smartphone to charge, she showered, had a snack, and lay down on the bed. Although the time was late, the mattress was comfortable and no loud noises penetrated the hotel room. There was no sleep in either eye. Still, in the morning there would be the meeting for which she had traveled. And again there was anxiety. The girl thought for the 100th time what to say to the innocent victim of deception. How to apologize for her grandmother. And in general, in what style to talk. After all, if with good-natured Alice everything somehow turned out to be very easy, it does not mean that communication with Marian and Cheryl will be as pleasant. Although only managing to fall asleep towards morning, Sabrina woke up a few minutes before her alarm clock. The disturbing night, thanks to the girl's youth, had left no noticeable marks on her appearance, and at 10 she ventured to call Cheryl. The woman answered almost instantly. It seemed as if she had been expecting the call. She probably had. After all, it's not often that relatives who didn't know about each other meet. Having quickly arranged to meet at a cafe near the hotel, Cheryl was the first to end the call. Surprisingly, the choice of a neutral public place to meet had finally calmed Sabrina, on whom her recent acquaintance with Alice had made a most pleasant and even reassuring impression. Well, there's just no way such a sweet, kind woman could be friends with and consider bad people her family. So both Marian and Cheryl are at least quite adequate. Besides, in a cafe, surrounded by people, it is unlikely to come to a violent expression of emotion, and there is less risk that Marian will get too nervous. She transferred the basket of apples into the spacious shopping bag she had thoughtfully brought with her and set off. As she approached the cafe, Sabrina spotted a slender woman on the porch of the establishment, whose features looked like the girl from the pictures in Marian's letter. "Hello, Cheryl. I'm Sabrina Robinson. It turns out my grandfather is your daddy," the girl said hello first. The woman smiled. "A pleasure. Completely sincerely speaking. I was told by Alice that she had a wonderful experience, and her judgment, as life has shown, is to be trusted. Come on, I'll introduce you to Mum, and we can have a quiet chat. She is waiting for us inside." The introduction procedure was remarkably smooth. Marian was friendly, but with ill-concealed interest in the face of her favorite man's granddaughter. To somehow break the lingering silence, Sabrina held out a bag to the woman. "These are some apples from Grandpa's garden." Marian pulled away from studying Sabrina's face and looked inside the bag and aghast. "Crazy. This is the real variety." The woman carefully pulled out one fruit, sniffed it, holding it gently as if the apple were a living thing, and without addressing either Sabrina or her daughter, spoke softly. It was noticeable that Marian was anxious to express all the pain she had accumulated. Vincent and I once dreamed that we would live in a house with an apple tree around it. Not just as a fruit tree, but sort of in honor of me. My full name is Marianne, which means apple blossom. It's such a shame our dreams didn't come true. I was only 15 when we met. In my native land, however, all girls grow up early, ripe for married life with the man they love. Vincent was 9 years older. I wasn't embarrassed by the age difference. I lied to him. I told him I was an adult. He didn't think I was lying. We loved each other, forgetting everything. I guess the higher powers made me pay for my lies and my sin. And this terrible punishment is also reflected on my daughter. The woman stroked her daughter's hand, who blushed like a boiled crayfish and fell silent. Sabrina, who listened to her without interrupting, confessed. It wasn't a higher power that intervened in your life at all. It's much simpler and more hurtful than that. Grandfather Vincent received some of your letters only after the death of his wife, my grandmother. Sabrina detailed everything she knew herself and, not forgetting to mention her strange dream, summarized. So I came here to make you all aware. Both my parents and I thought it was the fair thing to do. I'm sorry your love had such a tragic history, but nothing can be undone now. Marian held the apple in one hand, pressing it to her heart with the palm of her hand, the other wiping away the tears that were stubbornly rolling down her cheeks. Neither Cheryl nor Sabrina knew what to say or how to comfort the woman in her grief. There was a silence, like an unspoken moment of silence for Vincent's death. They had not yet ordered drinks and food. Marian, as if waking from a daze, suggested, "My dears, why don't we take a walk down the street? I'm feeling a little short of breath." Sabrina and Cheryl agreed without hesitation, although the look on the waiter's face when he didn't wait for an order, or at least a tip, was simply disgruntled. No one seemed to care about him at all. Three members of the fair sex were pondering the vicissitudes of fate and how outside interference ruins the most wonderful dreams. Her daughter wanted to take the bag of apples, but Marian stopped her. "I'm sorry, but I don't want to part with these apples." The long handles allowed her to hang the bag on her shoulder, so it wasn't too heavy to carry. Marian asked Sabrina to tell her everything she knew about her grandfather, what he did for a living, what he liked to watch, what he liked to wait, other everyday details. The woman seemed to absorb the moments that passed her by and smiled quietly. Perhaps she imagined that she herself had been living next to him all these years. The almost idyllic walk was interrupted by the ringtone of Cheryl's mobile phone. The mail caller was shouting so loudly that even from the distance of the alley, Sabrina could hear everything he was saying. "Why the hell aren't you home and at work? I was in a hurry, driving like a madman, and it's like a bad joke. Where are you wandering? If I find out you're cheating on me, I'll kill you, your lover, and your mother. I want you out of my flat." The stately Cheryl seemed to grow smaller as she listened to the tirade. The lights in her eyes went out, and she replied briefly, "I'll be right there." And Marian became visibly agitated. It seemed the voice of the man who had called was familiar to her, and this man did not evoke the slightest positive emotion in her. Cheryl began to say goodbye to Sabrina, and then turned to her mum. "Look, I'm going to run. Marcus seems pissed off already. You two talk some more. There's probably a lot of things you'd like to talk about." Cheryl hurried away, and from that moment the ease of Marian and Sabrina's conversation seemed to evaporate. The girl understood that the woman was terribly afraid for her daughter, who, as it was easy to understand, was in a relationship with a real tyrant. Soon Marian confirmed her young companion's conjecture. "I have the impression that my daughter is continuing my bitter story of slavery at the mercy of a cruel, overbearing man. However, unlike me, she got married officially, and with great love. At least 15 years ago it seemed that way. I was so happy for my daughter. Marcus always treated me and Cheryl with respect. But as soon as he could talk me into adding my savings to the shared flat, things started to go sour. One thing didn't suit him, then another. While I was living separately in a rented room from my daughter and son-in-law, and did not realize how everything really was. Then, 5 years ago, I got seriously ill and went on a long sick leave. My employer laid me off, so I had to ask Marcus to move into their one-bedroom flat. I felt I had a moral right to do so, but of course it was awkward. I hid my pride and asked to stay with my daughter and Marcus. That's when I realized they weren't doing well. There was always some sort of grudge against my daughter. Jealousy, hurtful words, in a milder form than I'd been subjected to in the past. But every accusation against Cheryl was a punishment. Recently, he's been harping on my infertility, even though he's always said that his back is interfering with our life plans. I get the impression he's provoking Cheryl into divorce, and then we'll end up with some kind of cubbyhole when we share the flat. I realize now that Marcus is going to divide everything down to the last spoonful. That she and I will be like two blades of grass that can't be broken. I don't have a law degree. Cheryl's a long way from it either. We can't financially afford a good lawyer. Sabrina didn't know how to console the unfortunate woman who had never in her life been able to lean on a man's reliable shoulder instead of throwing herself into the fray on her own. Alice's friendship with her mom seemed to be the only bright spot in her fate. It was not easy, but when the problems try to solve not one person, already at least morally easier. And Marion confessed. As soon as I lost my full-time job and started baking at home, the delicate balance collapsed. Everything went downhill somehow. Although the standard of living even seemed to have improved. I could probably pay my rent again. But it's ironic. I'm just afraid for my daughter's health. Oh, I'm so afraid Marcus is going to start laying hands on Cheryl. And right now my heart is restless, like some kind of trouble is coming. Sabrina, I hate to drag you into our family squabbles, but come to our place, please. Marcus needs to tone down his arrogance in front of you. That's what he always does in front of strangers. He behaves enthusiastically and even self-consciously, playing the role of a model husband. If you ask our neighbors, they'd probably all agree that my Cheryl is incredibly lucky to have him. Sabrina immediately agreed to keep Marion company. Soon, after a few bus stops and a short walk down the street, they were inside the flat. A muffled male voice could be heard coming from one of the rooms. Now I'm going to teach you how a husband should be greeted, because you need to put the idea in ditches like you not to twist your tail in the absence of your lawful spouse. Marion opened the door and saw Marcus grab Cheryl by the neck, lifting her off the floor in a state of some irrational anger. The woman took the bag of apples off her shoulder and knocked her son-in-law on the head. The man, never letting go of his victim, slumped to the floor. Cheryl wheezed from coughing. "Mom, what are you doing? What fly bit you? What if you fractured Marcus's skull?" The woman slowly walked over to the couch, sat down on it, and asked, "Cheryl, nothing will happen to Marcus. You better get me some water and a sedative. Drops my heart starting to pound." Sabrina, meanwhile, was looking closely at the man. He was clearly stunned, but not too badly, and was already making attempts to get up. He had a dazed look on his face. Marcus was in no hurry to get up and rubbing the back of his head. He looked angrily at Marion and threatened. "Don't even think you're going to get away with this. I'll go to the trauma center, get the beatings taken out, and put you senile old woman, behind bars." Cheryl's hands shook as she handed the cup of medicine to her mum. The woman began to urge Marcus to take it easy, but he only became more vocal and threatening. "You'll go to your death, and then you'll die in the state house. And with your health there is nothing to be there. A woman, as they say, is easier on the horse than on the mare." Unexpectedly, Marcus' tirade was interrupted by Sabrina, who, together with her grandfather and father, had watched various detective shows and had little but valuable experience in calming down even the most inadequate visitors and suppliers. "First of all, I'm calling the police here right now. I saw you trying to hurt Cheryl with my own eyes. So Marion's actions may well be classified as grievous bodily harm in self-defense." Sabrina couldn't understand how she'd had the audacity to call a grown man some criminal code numbers from the depths of her subconscious. Probably the stress had taken its toll. She was so dashingly inserting phrases from her head, some legal terms, that Marcus, under the fierce pressure of the stranger, visibly staggered, and then, carefully rising, left the room, throwing his wife. "You are lucky I have a strong head, or you would have been a widow." When the man left, Sabrina took a seat on the couch next to Marion. The woman began to apologize to her guest. "I'm sorry, Sabrina, for what happened." Inside, though, the girl was all shaking with anger. She managed an almost calm reply. "Nothing to apologize for at all, Cheryl." Cheryl stood against the wall and listened to what was going on in the kitchen, where Marcus had gone. Then she rushed in, much to the surprise of her mom and Sabrina. The man was climbing the cupboards in a fit of rage, throwing everything out of them onto the floor. Marian quietly called out to her son-in-law, "Marcus, be quiet. I hid my stash a long time ago. As soon as I noticed that the note started to disappear from it. You won't find anything in the kitchen. Don't get your hopes up." The man was crushing groats and pasta with his feet, not knowing where he was stepping. He walked out of the kitchen, nearly knocking down Cheryl, who was in his way, and soon slammed the door loudly. Marian and Cheryl began to clean up Marcus's mess, and Sabrina joined them without hesitation. To the objections of her hosts, the girl confessed. "I feel partly a little guilty for everything that has happened, so of course I won't stand aside." The mess in the kitchen was almost cleared up when Marcus appeared in the doorway, accompanied by a man in a police uniform. "Hello, Lieutenant Norman Morris, Precinct Commander. Marcus asked me here to look into the circumstances of the battery." Marian sank into a chair in exhaustion. Cheryl glared angrily at her husband, who on the contrary was cheering. While the women were cleaning up, he had hustled over and literally dragged the law enforcement officers into the flat, greatly exaggerating the extent of the conflict. Sabrina slumped against the wall at Marcus's insolence and blurted out to eliminate the possibility of a trick from this man with a rotten, petty soul. "Excuse me, Norman, may I see your ID?" The lieutenant produced the ID and began his questioning. As Marian began to recount what had happened, Sabrina asked permission to make a phone call. Morris did not interfere, and the girl hurriedly dialed her father's number. Wilfred listened to his daughter without interrupting, and then said, "In general, now Oliver will call you back. He is well versed in such matters. You put the phone on speaker and I think he'll be able to resolve the situation favorably and without hassle." Sabrina's father wasn't wrong. Marcus's look of triumph melted as the policeman, who had seen the red fingerprints on Cheryl's neck during the phone call, began to cast disapproving glances at his insolent husband. The lawyer insisted that the lieutenant also take a statement from the woman who had been assaulted by her husband, and this speech had a marvelous effect. After the mutually amiable conclusion of the telephone conversations, Morris asked Marcus sternly, "Do you still claim that your mother-in-law hit you with a heavy bag? Out of the blue? The picture of this incident is quite different. You, Marcus, practically made a false call and lied about it. Unfortunately, it's not a prosecutable offense, but you could get a fine. I'm going to write down everything as it happened, and I'm warning you at once, don't lie to me again." When Marian showed her terrible weapon, with which she had hit her son-in-law on the head, the policeman could hardly contain a smile and involuntarily admired the large apples. Marcus, having read and signed the document, cursed and swore at his wife, her mum, and their inexplicable young protector. The police officer reprimanded the man, and he left the flat in a rage. Norman turned to Cheryl and said, "I will advise you now, not as a neighborhood officer, but just as a human being, do not tolerate such an attitude. Further, as experience shows, such marriages do not lead to anything good. Divorce before it's too late." Cheryl thanked the precinct. "Thank you, Norman, for your informal approach. You've dealt with the situation fairly." Marian put almost half of the apples Sabrina had brought in a bag and handed it to the police officer with the words, "Please take this as a token of appreciation. I am very sorry that my intemperance caused my son-in-law to disturb you." The policeman shrugged his shoulders, saying it was his job, and then, as if shedding the veneer of officialism, asked with admiration in his voice, "How did you manage to grow such beautiful apples? At my parents' dacha this year, almost the entire crop at the stage of wilting hail beaten. What is not beaten, then during the frost rotted." Marian smiled. "I did not hope to admire such apples myself. It's the famous real variety. These apples were generously brought to us by Sabrina, our volunteer advocate, from another state, where a good man had brought a seedling from another country many years ago. Despite the difference in climate, the tree took root. The neighborhood officer thanked me again for the apples. Just in case, he dictated his phone number and left the flat after saying goodbye. In spite of the happy resolution of the problem, Marcus's petty revenge in the form of calling the police was a rather exhausting event for everyone. Marion jokingly declared, "That's enough cleaning for today. Where have you seen this? She comes to visit us and we give her a broom and dustpan. Basta, girls, let's take a break. Let's close the table in my room. This situation is making us hungry." Sabrina was removed from the party preparations and hurried to call her father to tell him that the conversation with the lawyer had helped her out of a very difficult situation. Wilfred and Patricia, who knew from her husband a slightly different version of events, were relieved when their daughter told them. Even at the age of 24, Sabrina was still the same favorite little girl for her parents, whom they wanted to protect, to cover with their care like a dome, impenetrable to any evil. As Alice had said, Marion was an incredibly skillful cook. Sabrina enjoyed the seemingly simple but delicious dishes. After tea with amazing homemade sweets, Cheryl asked her guest, "Can we have a Skype video call with your dad? I would at least like to meet my only sibling remotely that way." Sabrina confessed, "My parents asked me that too, but I didn't know how to suggest it. Is it convenient?" Marion splashed her hands. "My clever girl, what a good idea you have. Hurry up and get everything set up." Just a few minutes later, Wilfred's image appeared on the laptop screen. First of all, the man began to apologize to Marion. "It's hard for me to say this, but the happiness of my parents' family and my own carefree childhood was actually built on a foundation of your misfortunes. Most likely, if the letters from you had reached my father earlier, he would have found a way to help you. However, my mother was probably afraid that he would leave everything and ask for a divorce, and go to you and the daughter he never got to meet. I sincerely apologize to you, Marion. I want you to know that you can always count on me. Sabrina will leave you my phone number and other contacts. Feel free to contact me anytime you need me." Sabrina stayed with her hospitable hosts into the evening, listening to Marion and Cheryl talk about herself and her family. Despite the rather odd circumstances of their acquaintance, neither felt the slightest bit awkward. Cheryl confessed, "I had no idea I'd suddenly have such a wonderful niece." As Marion watched Sabrina, she saw a subtle, almost imperceptible resemblance to Vincent's similar facial features. The dimples that appeared when she smiled, the funny habit of wrinkling her nose and frowning her eyebrows. For so many years, the woman remembered the one man she loved desperately. And then, as if out of habit, hoped for a meeting. And now there was no chance of seeing him again. It was incredibly sad. And the only consolation was that Vincent had not forgotten or betrayed her. He had naively believed what she had said. That was the only thing she could reproach him for if she wanted to. Countless times Marion had imagined that she had misconducted that fatal conversation. If only then, more than half a century ago, she had had the courage to tell her lover that his father was threatening to do away with him if she had offered to run away. Vincent would probably have found a better way of dealing with the problem, though. If only she had told him honestly years ago. They'd probably be together now, just as they'd dreamed. Maybe things would have turned out better for Cheryl, who would have felt her father's care and support in her personal life. Marion was incredibly sorry that she had failed to protect the fragile love. But she could not blame the woman who had become Vincent's lawfully wedded wife. After all, it was she, Marion, who had rejected the man she loved, even under duress. So there was no need to look for fault on the other side. It had been a long, eventful day, and after a long meal and much conversation, the table began to yawn, one at a time or all at once. Sabrina flatly refused to be escorted back to the hotel. "Don't worry, please. The taxi will take me directly to the place, so there won't be any complications. As soon as I'm in my room, I'll let you know." Marion and Cheryl said goodbye to Sabrina as a close relative, with whom not only blood ties but also friendship. Before getting into the taxi, the girl waved to her new acquaintances, looking out of the window, and did not notice how from the bench at the neighboring entrance, Marcus, filled with anger, was watching her. The man thought that this strange young upstart, whom he had seen for the first time in his life today, was to blame for the bad day. Come to think of it, he'd taken a slight hit, and Cheryl had been so over it that she'd left the house and hadn't even thought to put him on notice. Clearly, the matter was unclean. He, as a husband, had every right to teach her how a decent woman should behave. But this girl, instead of apologizing, started arguing with him, explaining that she had done nothing wrong. So he cut off her breathing a little, so that she would not be punished. And then the angry fury came in at the wrong time and hit him on the head with all her might. Marcus rubbed the back of his head, feeling the painful bump, and continued to think about the hurt he'd suffered. It probably wouldn't have turned out so well for his wife and her mum if it hadn't been for the unfamiliar face. She'd been the devil to show up at their flat today. The man was sure that without the support of this educated wretch, they wouldn't have dared to make a peep in his direction. Not only that, but he would have been able to convince the police officer that the women were conspiring against him. Only this young sheep Sabrina, as it was written in the report of the district officer, had a trump card. After the intervention of an obviously competent and knowledgeable lawyer, he, Marcus, had to leave the flat with nothing, although he also had the right to the living space. However, the fight for her still ahead. In the meantime, we have to deal with these insolent women. It's useless to break in now to his wife and her mum. They're probably locked up with all the locks and chains. But it's the right thing to do to catch up and teach the runaway a lesson. Marcus sat on the bench like a predator in ambush, watching for the defenseless sheep to leave the flock and be at his mercy. The man even chuckled, glad to find such a comparison. But the wait was prolonged. The autumn evening, gentle and merciless, already hinted that the planned hunt would not take place. Marcus was shivering, whether from restrained rage or from hunger and cold, and was about to leave. But then the door opened, and a fugitive jumped out into the street. Marcus' joy was a little premature, for the insolent sheep had got into a taxi. But that only made the man more excited. The chase was on. Luckily, the cars were side by side. In the meantime, the city's heavy traffic would keep the would-be victim out of sight. Sabrina was already gripping the front door handle of the hotel, wishing she could collapse on the bed and get some sleep. But she heard a voice behind her. Sabrina, or should it be Bizarre? The girl automatically turned around and lost precious fractions of a second. Marcus, whose voice she recognized perfectly well, was rapidly approaching her. Sabrina turned away and, trying to get into the hotel faster, started pushing the doors the wrong way out of fright. When at last rescue was at hand, the man grabbed her by the waist, turned her round to face him, and threatened her in a feignedly affectionate tone. "Where are you going in such a hurry? Let's have a chat, shall we? Explain to me, why the hell are you meddling in my family life? Why don't you say anything, you sheep? How long has it been since you got punched in the face for your big mouth? Who asked you to interfere?" The girl prepared to shout loudly and thought about how to get free. But she didn't have to look for rescue on her own. She couldn't see how the policeman, who was already in civilian clothes, came out of the ajar door behind her back, but she was incredibly happy when she heard. "Marcus, you're absolutely wrong right now. Let the girl go." Marcus instantly loosened his grip and started to justify himself to the policeman. "Norman, I just came to talk to you. Then I wanted to take you for a walk to show you the city." As the policeman left the hotel, he asked, "Sabrina, if you wouldn't mind waiting for me in the lobby. I have something to arrange with Marcus." Sabrina sat down in a comfortable chair. A few minutes later, the police officer sat down next to her and confessed. "You know, I actually came to see you. When my parents saw the apples, they were so distraught. They asked me to arrange with you for a cuttings from this tree. My father wants to graft cuttings and try to grow such beauty too. I can't count the number of times they cheated me with varieties in the markets. On the picture one thing, but grows completely different. So I came here to the hotel, and as it turns out, not for nothing." The girl smiled. She liked this young and very correct and principled policeman. In gratitude for her rescue, she promised to send him as many cuttings as he wanted when she got to her grandfather's cottage. Sabrina and Norman, who asked to address him simply, without middle names, exchanged contacts and said goodbye. The man did not want to part with the charming girl, but he could not find any reason to stay with her. Sabrina thought, "I guess there's a reason Grandpa Vincent sent me to find Marion and Cheryl in my dreams. He also told me to bring apples with me. Events after meeting the relatives began to develop with frightening speed. Cheryl divorced from Marcus, and since in Sacramento they and Marion practically nothing held, after the exchange of the flat they moved at Wilfred's invitation to his father's house. The man offered wholeheartedly. "Since I am aware of my mother's guilt, let this house be at least a small compensation for all your suffering." Marion sat at length by the apple tree, carefully nurtured by her lover, stroking it like a living thing. Sabrina, who was always a welcome guest, was glad that the old woman had found peace, albeit belatedly. In Vincent's granddaughter's personal life, the sweet fruit of the apple tree also played an important role. Correspondence and regular telephone conversations with Norman made it clear that their affection was mutual, and that it was growing stronger with time. Soon the lieutenant moved to the city to his favorite girl, explaining, "Well, why, policemen are needed everywhere. And if necessary, I can learn another profession." Cheryl also found her own personal happiness, having met the brother of Aunt Charlotte's neighbor. Marion stroked the apple tree and whispered softly, "Thank you, Vincent. I know for a fact that it was you who helped to organize everything so well." A widow with many children sheltered astray on a frosty night. Then one day she came home early and froze when she saw ... MP4. Amanda was tidying up the mezzanine. Almost through tears, every single thing she picked up had something to do with it. Old shoes, carefully filled with copies of newspapers and packed still in their native boxes. Folded in 3 legs artificial Christmas tree. A box, sabers, wicked garlands used to still manage to shine in the hands of her husband. A cardboard treasure trove of Christmas tree toys, ski equipment. She froze for a second. Traitorous tears protruded in her gray eyes, unwilling to dry. The children must not see her longing and hopelessness. Away with the sadness. We must pull ourselves together. Her mother's anguished voice came to mind. "Amanda, don't hang around all that junk. The top storeroom is a bunch of junk. I'll be sure to get there and throw everything in the bin." I didn't get there. I didn't throw it out. I didn't have time. Not only that, about Amanda's father, the harmful neighbor Chloe liked to joke that she was born of a passing young man, but also her mother burned in a week. The doctor's verdict sounded dire. A worsening ulcer. Too late. You, my dear, came to us. Massive internal bleeding. We couldn't do anything even on the operating table. There was no time. The surgeon in blue uniform cast a pitying glance at the girl huddled on the couch near the operating theater and hurried away into the labyrinth of the hospital corridor. Amanda was left a complete orphan. She had no one in the world now. Yes, her mom complained of occasional stomach pains, but that this would be a death sentence was a shock to Amanda. A fierce, formidable, so combative woman. She seemed to show her power to everyone around her. Healthy, her daughter was pulling her own hump until she was 20. Almost brought her up and taught her. In the yard of their old 5-story building, she managed to keep order. First as the best in the whole neighborhood janitor, then in the role of manager, head of housekeeping. So in all hypostasis, she proved herself that all superiors were always calm in this house. Neither tenants nor electricians nor plumbers are not amused. Joyce will bring them all to their senses in no time. They'll be walking like silk. Mother was a self-taught intellectual with a high school education. She spent all her spare time reading books. The library in the neighboring house diligently sowed reasonable, good, eternal in the masses. She wrote and expressed her thoughts competently. In life, you cannot say that from the janitors appointed by the chief of the yard was inept. Household needs knew by heart. The entire large team of housekeeping on her literally prayed. She got a 2-room flat at the place of her work only 5 years ago. Before that, she lived in a servant's room for janitors with her daughter. And when a lonely old woman died on the ground floor, she was given a flat for her many years of endeavor. Now Amanda got the flat. The girl finished school well, easily entered the Pedagogical Institute, dreamed of teaching children Russian language and literature. When Joyce died, she had just finished her 4th year. Ahead of her was an internship at the school, and then the defense of her diploma. The only thing she didn't know was what to live on now. How was her mom going to make ends meet on her small salary? And she also dressed her daughter decently. It was a mystery to Amanda. The stash in the bookcase of the metal sesame box ran out almost immediately. At least the tenants contributed to the funeral expenses. The rest was taken care of by the communal workers. After sitting for a month on cereals, pasta, potatoes, and tea and sugar, as Joyce always used to stockpile food from her salary, Amanda realized that she needed to find a job. She wouldn't last long without a new injection of cash. In a month's time, she would be starting her 6-month teaching internship. That meant she would only be able to work in the evenings. How not to remember where many successful businessmen and film stars started their careers? The answer lay on the surface: a waiter in some cafe or bar. A suitable place was found surprisingly quickly in the beer bar favorite, making money on broadcasting sporting events with beer drinks and light snacks. The waitress had just quit. The perky, fast-talking girl had run out of patience. And all because of the fact that the audience in the hall, with a huge TV set on the whole wall, showed emotions in a peculiar way about scored goals or missed goals. In a burst of joy, some red-haired guy would pour the rest of his beer directly into a round hole in the center of the table and float a small coin in it. Another would roughly kick a waitress passing by a table with a full tray. A third one would push the table, jump up angrily, and start walking in circles around other tables, not allowing the employee with the next portions of foamy drink to move freely around the hall. The manager of the establishment saw this disturbance, but their bar was on the outskirts of the city. Its contingent was made up of local laborers. They did not seriously damage the property. They would make some noise and then go home peacefully. Even fights happened only a couple of times and ended in the beginning with a couple of slaps without serious damage. Amanda was told about the vacancy in the bar favorite by her neighbor Chloe, who knew all the news in the district before the district police and grandmothers at the entrance. She caught the girl in the entrance and snidely whispered in her ear, "Amanda, I thought you were looking for a job, not Dusty." "Well, I got you a job, Sebastian. You know his bar, the favorite? He's got Jenny, who's off shift today. Go and have a chat with him. He's a nice bloke. He won't hurt you." Sebastian greeted Amanda with the clinking of glass beer mugs. There was muffled whispering in the huge place, as the dishwasher and the cleaning lady talked to each other. The latter had just scrubbed the floor to a perfect shine, but curiosity got the better of her. Where did Sebastian go? Does he think that an hour before opening he'll find some idiot from the street to take the place of a waitress? Only nobody wants to put up with this drunken crowd. I told him to take my apprentice as a waitress, but he said no. He said she was old. Where have you seen a woman at 47 years old being written off? Let her suffer now without a waitress. Eva also joined the conversation. "Oh, you're right. I offered him my sister Jacqueline as a waitress, and she's only 40. But he refuses. He only wants a younger girl for our hot guy customers, so that she makes their blood boil, as if they were waitresses." Was that a good thing? She was always carrying those mugs around with a sour face. She's got a husband at home, so why make eyes at someone else? Behind the wall, 2 young guys were nimbly taking pizza dough out of cardboard boxes, then pushing them into a large oven. Sebastian's new acquisition and pride is a special pizza oven. The purchased dough bases were smeared with mayonnaise, and then toppings were placed on them, either with sausage, or with fish, or simply with grated cheese. Jacqueline and 2 of her fellow students worked at the favorite bar. They were on an apprenticeship from culinary school. Sebastian didn't have a big kitchen. For hot meals, pizza from the oven at most. For snacks, an endless amount of pre-packaged snacks and industrial products: dried smoked fish, chips, dried calamari, spiced nuts, cheeses, sliced smoked sausage for toast and bread, breadcrumbs with salt and pepper. It's impossible to list everything. The bar didn't bother with plates, forks, spoons. The customers included all the disposable plastic utensils they used in the bill. Another thing, beer mugs. There was a whole collection on the shelf above the bar. The owner brought this glass from different cities where he visited. The refined versions were for VIP clients, brought from Prague and Munich. The rest, more simple, bought in souvenir shops. It was in such an environment that Sebastian met Amanda for the first time. In the beer bar for sports fans, there was not yet a single bartender out of the 3 bartenders working here. They will be here by the beginning of the shift. After all, bartenders are the elite of the staff environment. The girl climbed the stairs, pushed the door open with determination, and froze, adjusting her eyes to the semi-darkness in the huge room. All those present turned their heads towards the open doorway, like statues. In front of them stood a young girl of medium height, a fine figure, an inquisitive look of dark gray eyes, a russet fluffy ponytail of hair carelessly gathered, a little pulled down because of a bright hairpin. Light summer jeans, a t-shirt with an intricate print, light white trainers on her feet. That's pretty much the whole portrait of the stranger. "Good afternoon," Amanda said in a ringing voice. "Can I see Sebastian?" "What do you need him for?" Eve answered cheerfully. "He's not here now. He's away on business. And I'm in no hurry. For me, it's either work or he's gone." Amanda grinned. "How so?" The women were as curious as magpies. "If I don't get a job here, tomorrow I'll go to the world with a bag," Amanda explained calmly. And there was so much bitterness in her words that EVA and her companion forgot all the barbs, choked and stared at the girl in expectation of confession. And Jenny and the boys pulled themselves up, all craning their necks to hear better. "I'm not going to tell you much, my dears," Amanda continued. "I became a final orphan a little over a month ago, a student at Pedagogical University. I have to go to practice in the mornings, and my scholarship is only to pay the rent and buy bread and milk, nothing more. I live 2 blocks away. If your boss hires me, I'll try not to let anyone down." At the sound of the door opening again, all heads turned simultaneously. Sebastian himself squeezed into the place, again with a cardboard box in his hands. "Sebastian, did you bring new glasses and mugs again?" Eva called out to him in a friendly manner. They had known each other for years. Once in their youth, EVA had been behind the counter in his first beer bar since the Soviet times. Then she'd given up, grown old. But she didn't want to part with her Sebastian. So they followed the boss from bar to bar, until they organized everything here from scratch, having taken over the old diner from the negligent owners. EVA scrubbed and dusted every inch of the hall on her elbows and knees. Everything around shone with cleanliness and newness. Immediately after the opening, people started to come to the favorite. A penny dripped into the cash register. Her kind Sebastian blossomed and fussed. "Come in, Chief," this time his faithful assistant said. "While you were traveling, we found a new waitress. Intelligent, not like me, but a good girl. We've already interviewed her. She's a good fit, so we're going to take her on tonight and test her out. And we'll see what's what. Let's get Jenny and Jenny working four-handed." And so began Amanda's first day of work, which determined her future. By the beginning of her pedagogical practice, Amanda had already mastered the favorite bar so well that the rest of the staff thought they had seen this noisy, always dissatisfied young lady. As if such an unpleasant girl had never worked in their home-like friendly team. Discipline suddenly settled down in the hall. The regulars didn't turn on the pretty Amanda with bad antics at all. And if someone tried to get handsy at first, the others looked at him in such a way that he felt sick. Sebastian only hummed approvingly. Evia soon gave her summary. "Amanda's a smart one. Men can tell from a mile away that you can't lose with her. She's not rude, she doesn't sling mud, and she's not sticky. She works hard and takes care of her clients." 6 months flew by. Amanda fully mastered in the bar, deftly carried in her hands at the same time 4-liter mugs of foamy nectar. At the same time, she never familiarized herself with the guests of the establishment, clearly keeping them at a safe distance. The New Year holidays flew by like a comet across the starry sky. The year 2014 had arrived. By the beginning of February, Amanda had completed her teaching practice reports. 2 state exams were behind her, and she was admitted to the dean's office to write and then to defend her diploma. Everyone was looking forward to the Winter Olympics in Athens. The country had won the right to welcome athletes from all continents. The most avid fans bought tickets for matches and competitions in advance. Regular visitors of the favorite were looking forward to cheering for our country here in the bar. In the atmosphere of general jubilation, they shifted mugs with beer when our team will stand on the highest step of the podium, or will be sad if they give up the championship to faster and more agile, and maybe more fortunate rivals. It was impossible to watch the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games at the stadium in February 2014 without a lot of emotions and a lot of libations. Beer was flowing. Passions were running high. When the American Olympic team appeared on the platform to the track of a famous band, everyone at the tables in the bar jumped up with jubilant shouts. It seemed that no one could stay at home that night. The favorite was packed. Amanda could barely keep up with taking orders and running from the bar to the customers. At the peak of the noise and clamor, the door of the bar opened and a new, unfamiliar to the old-timers company poured in from the cold. The young, athletic-looking guys piled into the center of the bar, where a few bar stools were still empty. Amanda breathed a sigh of relief that at least their agile bartender could handle these guys on his own, and fixed a strand of her blonde hair out of the ponytail that was secured on the top of her head with a colored knitted elastic band. Eve appeared from the back room and whispered trustingly, "If I make it through tonight until the favorite closes, consider me an Olympic gold medalist too. I'm exhausted." The old cleaning lady winked at her conspiratorially. "And look at the newcomers. They don't look like neighborhood natives at all. One is more beautiful than the other. I remembered a phrase from my favorite film, 'Where did such a handsome man come from?'" Eva laughed and Amanda turned round to look at the handsome strangers. Her attention was immediately drawn to one of the sturdy, trim guys. He was slowly sipping beer from a tall glass with a colorful emblem on the side and watching the action on the big TV screen. Even from a distance, it was obvious that he had dark brown eyes, almost like two glowing coals, and a short cut of dark, almost black hair. Good, Amanda thought to herself. I've forgotten when I ever paid attention to the male gender, and I'm only turning 21 in a couple of months. With my studies and my daily waitressing job at Sebastian's, I'm going to turn into an old maid or a blue stocking without a single sign of femininity so soon. As if overhearing her thoughts, the guy suddenly turned round and looked straight at her. Without averting his gaze for a few seconds, he smiled warmly, and only then replied to the guy sitting next to him. Since the car stalled, they took it to a service station. God told us to watch the Olympic opening ceremony here. "Okay, Kevin, whatever you say," he replied. "At least I got some warmth while we waited for the tow truck. I was freezing to death." They talked some more quietly and then ordered more beer. The evening was drawing to a close, and Amanda's shift was coming to an end. It hadn't been easy, but the opening of the Athens Olympics had been worth it. Everyone was in high spirits. Amanda had forgotten all about the guy who had caught her eye for a while, but somewhere in the heavens, fate had decided otherwise. When the Athens Olympic skiing competition fell on the schedule, he showed up at their bar, the favorite, but this time alone, without his mates, taking the far table in the corner. Gesturing for her to come over, he ordered a mug of non-alcoholic beer and a plate of peanuts, croutons, and squid rings. He kept his eyes on the screen while the skiing competition was on, and as he left, he suddenly asked Amanda a question. "What time do you get off work, Amanda?" Her name was on her jacket. "I'd like to walk you out, if you don't mind." "I don't mind." The waitress, who was already quite tired at the end of the day, looked embarrassed. Now she didn't care whether she had a decent appearance for socializing with a handsome man. She was surprised that the man she had turned her feminine attention to was the one who had returned to the favorite bar. "Your shift will be over in 40 minutes, Amanda said. "I'll be waiting for you in the car out front. Take it easy and get your work done. I'm in no hurry." They drove the 2 blocks to her house in a minute. The streets were deserted at night. Only rare streetlights and the moon in the sky slightly illuminated the even rows of brick 5-story buildings and the bench at the entrance. They were silent, as if they had water in their mouths. The guy only said deftly when he opened the car door for her, "I didn't get a chance to introduce myself. I'm Kevin. I'm a ski coach. I'm supposed to be in Athens right now if it weren't for the Olympics. I'm still watching my favorite events on TV. My charges are small. Their victories are still ahead of them." We reached the flat, where Kevin had volunteered to escort her, in complete silence, like gorillas in the forest before an important mission. "I'm not asking for coffee," the man said, "although I would like a cup of this invigorating drink." "Why not?" Amanda agreed easily, having had enough of the loneliness of returning to the warmth of home after work, with only the old refrigerator humming quietly at its epicenter. And then an equally ancient television switched on for company, and no one has been home for months. They entered the flat at the same time, bodies colliding on the threshold. Amanda had read in some novel before that there was such passion when sparks flew between a man and a woman. Now she saw the process in real life, and she even felt like she was electrocuted at the touch. "Amanda, let's switch to you," she heard Kevin's voice through the cotton wool in her ears and nodded in response. "Is that a Chinese god?" Kevin asked, pointing to a statue of some Asian goddess Joyce had given him a long time ago, and it was on the dresser. "I'm going to put the kettle on in the kitchen," he said. "I'm sorry, I'm just doing the housework. You're not looking so good. You're so tired after all that running around in the bar." 5 minutes later, 2 large cups of instant coffee were on the kitchen table. Nearby, fresh loaf and cheese sandwiches were calling for a snack. Amanda had just run to the shop for groceries before work. Kevin acted as if he'd been cooking dinner for the two of them for years, routine and familiar. After the meal, he quickly washed the cups over the kitchen sink and set them in the metal drying rack. He began to say goodbye. "Checked out the furnishings in your house. Until the Olympics are over, I'll meet you from work every day, and then we'll see." He was a quiet man and a very reliable husband for Kevin. She had never known before what it was like to be behind an impenetrable stone wall. They got close after meeting each other lightning fast, without a long courtship, without a candy bouquet period of special romance. He became her first and only man. And so he remained so to this day. A year after they met, Terence was born, a curly-haired, Kevin like Terence, and 3 years later a fidgety and bully Molly. He and Kevin had already decided that with their common passion for alpine skiing they would stop for now. Marcus, however, as their thoughts had not been heeded, came crashing down like a snowball 3 years after Molly was born. "What a terrible moment," Amanda often said after her husband's death. "How can it be? Just yesterday a man was hugging you, whispering tender words in your ear, living side by side. Today he is gone." Back then, at the beginning of their married life, and later in between having children, Kevin and Amanda spent all their free time in the mountains waiting for the first snow, or seeing it off at the end of the season. Amanda has long since graduated from a pedagogical institute, but she never had the chance to teach school children the rules of spelling and love of literature. At the Olympic Reserve School, where her husband worked, there was a vacancy for a tutor for a younger group of hopeful kids who had come to their town from all over the country. Kevin's parents were medical epidemiologists. They went for the long dollar, hooked on the natives with all their caring hearts. Amanda sometimes joked that their eldest son, Terence, was curly-haired only because Kevin had flown to a distant continent to see his parents and caught a local virus. Molly was just like her mother Amanda, blonde, gray-eyed with an outwardly calm and peaceful disposition. A misleading impression. In fact, she was a collector of pranks, a lover of sharp situations and adventures. The youngest Molly started skiing like a stumbling block. People around her joked. That girl was already born with ski boots and poles in her hands. Amanda stroked the ski equipment on the mezzanine. Her eyes stung with tears again. How ornate everything had turned out then, a year ago. Marcus was born. She was back on maternity leave with him. There was a surprise, a big one, as Kevin laughed. They were walking with the pram in the park near the newsagents. Terence and Molly lingered. They liked the plastic toys in the window. The chatty saleswoman even stretched her head out of the window, admiring their friendly family. And then she went somewhere in the inner pockets and pulled out a slightly tattered lottery ticket. "Young people, I've got a ticket here from the instant lottery. Just rub the strip and you'll see whether you've won or not. It's worth $100. Will you try your luck?" Kevin and Amanda laughed. "We don't believe in any of these lotteries. We'll buy a ticket from you. We'll bore you under the counter for a day to help you out. And these winnings are only shown in TV adverts to fool naive, ordinary people. We don't believe in such freebies." While they chatted with the newspaper and magazine saleswoman, Terence and Molly picked out a plastic toy each, both of them very pleased with their purchase. Noisily, they rushed forwards down Park Lane. Kevin told Marcus that he couldn't choose his present yet. It was an adult lottery. "Let's wipe off the strip right here," Kevin suggested. Amanda picked up the top layer of paper with the edge of her fingernail. Faded blue numbers began to appear underneath. When she read what appeared on the piece of paper, she grinned and said only one word. "Jokers." "Airy. What's so funny about that?" Kevin reacted instantly. "We won $100 million. $1 million doesn't smell like $1 million, but a number with 6 O's looks extremely strange too, Amanda answered him. Terrence and Molly had already returned to the kiosk, having run up and down the alley. The curious owner of the paper treasure peered out of the window. "Have you got a cash win? Up to $100? I can give it to you right here on the spot." "Yes, the number 100 is also on it," replied the bewildered Amanda. "Only it's not just dollars, it's millions." "Fuck you," the aunt said in surprise. I immediately thought that I should have erased the stripe on this seemingly expensive piece of paper with frayed edges. If the winnings are large, you'll have to go to the head office. In my memory, the largest sum of $25,000 was wiped off a ticket by a man. He came to me later and told me that he had been paid off. Excited by the unexpected situation, Kevin and Amanda, picking up the pram with Marcus and the older children, went home. There they took another look at the inscription on the ticket under a magnifying glass. There was no doubt about the numbers. A week later, the alpine ski enthusiasts convened a house council in Philadelphia. Amanda was appointed to preside. She had to say the last weighty word on what to spend the accidentally dropped and already safely received money. The woman thought for a while, and then she gave her verdict. "Kevin, I love you very much. I'm saddened by the longing for snow-capped mountain peaks in your eyes. You've already been to a ski resort with your students this winter season. But I remember your dream to conquer the black slopes on Elbrus. You can't go further than green and blue slopes with your students. They are all beginners." "Mostly," Kevin replied. "A couple of rides on the red slopes in their spare time, and that's it. Adrenaline. You can't build a new passion with that. You've got a week off in a week. I won't be able to keep you company because of Marcus. Go to Elbrus with some of the guys who love skiing," Amanda suggested. At first, his wife's suggestion puzzled Kevin, but his favorite woman was right. After a serious injury 8 years ago, professional skiing in any kind of competitive sport was a thing of the past for him. At first, he was even thoroughly discouraged by the doctor's verdict. Later, he was found by the management of the Olympic Reserve School in his hometown with a proposal to switch to coaching. He still kept in close touch with his friends, the same fans of mountain slopes covered with a cap of fluffy snow. He worked with novice boys and girls in the training center. The pain from the effects of the injury was slowly wearing off. He dreamed of at least once riding on a real dashing track for extreme skiers. He was obsessed with black runs and high difficulty. Kevin was seen off on his trip by his family, then popped into the patisserie to buy their favorite cakes and have tea in the evening to celebrate the head of house's holiday. Kevin always gave so much time to his housemates that their joy for him was genuine. "We should let the husband and dad go skiing once in a while too," Amanda considered. Then she vaguely remembered the day when she received a phone call from a ski base near Elbrus people saying something in Caucasian. They did not speak English well. 4 days after Kevin and his friends arrived at the base, a group of young rich people from the golden elite of society showed up. The young people went to the ski slopes drunk. When the instructor announced the danger of avalanches, they only laughed in his face. "We are not afraid of anything. We went to the track and will continue to go. Today we decided to try out your pro pist. We all have been skiing for years, and you are not our boss," they said to the elderly instructor guide, a Cabardinian with many years of experience, a former sportsman. "Do you even know how many people have already died near the black ski track? How many people, as reckless as you, have ended up in the permafrost, where even the corpses cannot be retrieved later? If you happen to fall to the rocky bottom?" And the weather promises to worsen, he shouted when he heard their statement. But nobody listened to the words of the experienced mountain old-timer. They passed around a flask of whiskey, patted each other on the shoulder, and piled out of the wooden log cabin into the street, Kevin told me later. He and his friends, who had already finished their coffee and khachapuri at the table, savoring the aromas of freshly baked pastries, soon got up from the table. Their plans included a short warm-up on the easy green course. They had no intention of taking any risks today. In the courtyard of the ski center, everything was quiet and peaceful. A big shaggy dog was stomping near the booth, having just finished a sugar bone which the cook from the cafe had given him. Here, far from civilization, it was not like anywhere else in the Alps. Much simpler, without the frills of tourist service. It is at the foot of the two-headed giant Elbrus. The regular guests of Kabardino-Balkaria are innumerable. And here, a little further from the village of Terskal, is a place for experienced people, for their own. In an hour after breakfast, a heavy, dense snow began to fall from the gray sky that was beginning to frown and puff up from unreasonable anger. In another hour, the sky was completely covered with inky purple clouds. The Kabardinian was muttering something quietly to himself, pursing his lips in frustration. Then he couldn't stand it any longer, put on warmer clothes, and went off in the direction of the black ski track. Having gone all the way along the paths he knew only to himself, in half an hour he stopped at the very top of the point of descent. At the side of the slope I saw a flock of young men in bright red and yellow jackets. They were fiddling about near the same spot, moving away from it, then approaching it again. The Kabardinian swore again, smelling something wrong. His fears were not in vain. When he reached the woeful skiers, they began to explain to him that they were engaged in an improvised contest. We were descending in a line one after another when three guys who were traveling in front of us fell through the snow like through the ground, they said. They were just gone. I told you. I warned you not to go on the black track. Even if you are drunk and in bad weather, the Kabardinian replied irritably. There are treacherous crevasses everywhere. I'll go and call the guys who ski on the green. Maybe they will help me with something. And I'll call the rescuers at the control and rescue post. They searched for the wayward trio until dark. All the next day, despite the constant threat of avalanche, to no avail. Then the rescuers canceled the expedition and told all the tourists who had found shelter at a remote ski base to descend to the foot of Mount Elbrus. It would be safer there if the acceleration of the snow mass developed at an extreme speed. Kevin couldn't find a place to stay, and then he decided to stay with the Kabardan guard. Both Jenny, the cook, and himself upstairs blamed themselves for not listening to the rich kids talking, for not stopping them when they were about to go to the black ski slope. Kevin was burning inside with a prickling cold. It seemed that it wasn't other people's boys who'd disappeared on the damn ski run, but one of his charges from the Olympic Reserve School. He couldn't find a place, rushing around the warm interior of the log cabin, grabbing his skis, his boots, his cozy warm down jacket. He had left for the mountain before dawn. No one will ever know what he was looking for, who he hoped to pull out from under the avalanche, what snow demons he was talking to. That night an avalanche came down to the foot of Elbrus. Maybe it was she who caught him with her dense snow edge, crushed him with her mass without stopping, rushing down, pinned him to the slope, and then ran further, breaking everything on her way. What dark force had dragged him upwards, onto the black track? The old Kabardian was never able to explain to Amanda, who came to collect her husband's body. Kevin was found 3 hours after dawn. Jenny, the cook, was too shy to look in his room and wake him for breakfast. The bed in the room was already cold. Kevin was lying in a fetal position with his arms and legs oddly crossed and tucked up against his stomach near the supposed edges of the cleft. The medical examiner, after the autopsy, wrote a report that his heart had stopped. Amanda, after reading this document, immediately recalled the words of Friedrich Nietzsche. If you stare at the abyss for a long time, the abyss also stares at you. It seemed to her all the time afterwards that the last hours of Kevin's life had been terrible. Just like that, he had magically appeared in her life unobtrusively, without further words or explanations, abruptly and quickly. He'd also left her life without saying goodbye, without explaining anything, without a final look in her eyes. You're not very good at cleaning the mezzanine, Mother Amanda said to herself. Time to feed the children and put them to bed. Marcus wasn't cranky today, thankfully. Kevin and Amanda's youngest son was about to turn 2. She'd recently found an activity that fascinated him so much that he could sit quietly for hours without a peep. The secret was simple. She would place a pair of her cleanly washed trainers in front of him. She would pull the lace out of one of them and leave it in the other. They say that children at 2 years old are still very young, that they don't understand the subtleties. But Marcus was eager to put the lace into the trainer and could sit with this toy for hours on end. The most interesting thing was that, as a result of his diligence, the shoelace that had been inserted into the shoe by his hands looked much neater than the other shoelace that had not been inserted by him. Believe it or not. For the trio's dinner, Amanda fed pancakes with cottage cheese, tea with ice cream and jam. Amanda told everyone to brush their teeth before bed and head for bed. Terrence, who had recently started first grade, and Molly, who was used to getting up early for kindergarten, were already accustomed to discipline. Marcus, the quiet one, only fell asleep after reading a story. Amanda had accustomed him to it herself. After that winnings almost unspent by Kevin, they lived on child allowances for the time being. The rest of the gift of fate was spent on lessons in Russian language and literature. Amanda was not a bad tutor for unhelpful pupils, but she couldn't take on many students. A good help could be the rent of Kevin's one-room flat, the renovation of which the family had long called a long construction project. All the years of living together with her husband Amanda never allowed him to sell the property. Before we know it, Terrence will be older and looking for a bride, she joked. All we need to do is freshen up your flat, change its bachelor atmosphere for a more cozy one. We'll have a family nest ready for our handsome Terrence. He's growing by leaps and bounds. Sell both my flat and Kevin's and get something newer and bigger. For some reason, Amanda wasn't feeling well either. It was a feeling she couldn't quite explain. But they had lived in an old 5-story building on the outskirts of the city for 7 years of their marriage. Once again, there was no money to continue renovating Kevin's house. The money melted away inexorably. The question of placing Marcus in an institution was again urgent. But here was the problem: the doctors said that he could not go to a kindergarten. Marcus was often ill with acute respiratory diseases and acute respiratory infections. If he could go to daycare regularly, he'd have to be 5 years old. If Kevin were here, he'd think of something. Amanda thought bitterly. In the meantime, she dutifully picked up Marcus's favorite book to reread his favorite fairy tale to her son for the 100th time. It was his all-time favorite book. Finally put the entire junior guard to bed. It was almost midnight on the clock. Amanda was disappointed to find that there was no bread or milk in the house. Even porridge for breakfast would be difficult to boil. Amanda tiptoed down the corridor, pulled on her coat and shoes, grabbed her bag and ran to the shop. It was a good thing they'd recently opened a convenience store right at the end of their house, where they always had dairy products and fresh baked goods. The golden autumn outside the window rustled the fallen leaves underfoot. The current janitors were not as diligent as Joyce. In her day, she had collected leaves into large bags reluctantly, tentatively. Burning leaves was forbidden by the sanitary control. So the bags first stood along the walls of the house, and then once a week they were taken somewhere by a rubbish truck. Now there was a string of them lined up next to the dark brickwork. Amanda thought there was a shadow moving at the epicenter. Kitty, 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 she called, just in case, as she often fed stray cats. She even promised her children that one day they would have a pet. Hey, I'm going to the shop. Can I buy you some sausages? Show your mustache and stripes. Amanda almost fainted in surprise at the sound of the ringing voice. Thank you, of course. Sausage is good when you're hungry, but I like a big, juicy wiener, even if there's no place to boil them. Who are you? A woman called out. Stranger, you'll be surprised, but I'd really like to know who I am, replied a girl of small stature with 2 braided pigtails and eyes that were clearly not those of a child. Why do you walk alone at night? It's not safe to be out here in the suburbs alone at night. I was shopping in the supermarket, the strange woman replied artlessly. I didn't manage to steal anything from the most vigilant guard. He's on shift today. Are you a thief? Amanda was once again surprised. Not the most promising of jobs, I must say. It happens very rarely, just small things. If you don't manage to earn something honestly one day. Where do you live and with whom? Amanda asked. She was shocked by the answer. Since I was found on the street, I've been living with the homeless in a house being prepared for demolition near the city station. The police know about our community, but for some reason they don't touch us. Maybe they're fine with us being there for a little while under their watch. I have amnesia. We have an old doctor there who's also homeless. She's the one who diagnosed me with it. She's the one who fixed me after I got hit on the head from behind. I don't know who attacked me. I don't remember my name or where I lived before. The girl's trusting confession touched something in Amanda's soul. She immediately asked herself a question. What would Kevin do in her place now? She knew the answer. He would try to do something to help the unfortunate victim of circumstances. Somehow, Amanda was sure that there was no lie in the words of the stranger of the night. "Tell you what, let's go to the shop. I need to stock up on milk and bread, and then back to our house. I've got 3 kids. We'll make room somehow," Amanda suggested. "I don't feel comfortable." "You don't know me at all," she replied. Amanda immediately thought to herself, "As a teacher of Russian language and literature, I can't help but notice her correct and well-spoken speech. The girl is obviously not from the marginalized or the slums. What could have brought her to the lair of the homeless? What insidious forces and people had a hand in it?" In the supermarket, Amanda examined her find near the bags of fallen leaves in more detail. Poor clothes, but perfectly clean, no holes. She looked to be in her early 20s. In the darkness, the girl seemed almost childlike. The unhappy creature's look was not childish at all. It read some life experience and even a lively mind. This inquisitive gaze of green-brown eyes was not stupid. Apparently, in her past life, this girl had worn glasses. In the brightly lit hall of the supermarket, she checked the expiry dates on the labeling of milk and sour cream. She asked Amanda for clarification. Some of the dates were written in too small numbers. Then she took a long look at the labels on the bread, now wrapped in polythene with colorful pictures, baking names, and other information. Amanda was surprised again. She had chosen baked goods only on the basis of freshness, appearance, and naivety. She read something thoughtfully until she put a sliced loaf and a loaf of wholemeal bread in her basket. At the checkout, she didn't fuss and acted confidently. It didn't seem like the sort of thing that someone who was used to stealing and had never known any other way of life could behave. "Where did you learn all these tricks to choose the right products?" Amanda asked. "I don't know. It's like something in my head. It would be better if the name told me my memory, not how to understand bread and milk," the girl replied. They entered the flat quietly. The children were sleeping peacefully. Only the night light in the hall cast faint glints of light on the walls. "They call me Agnes among the homeless, because I seem to be a foundling with that name. Will you call me that too, since you've decided to invite me to visit? And don't think I'm being cheeky. Can I take a shower at your place? I've always felt uncomfortable washing in our half-barrack behind a screen. Fetch water from the pump around the corner, heated up on the electric cooker, for which we always get beaten up by the police. What's all this washing?" Amanda brought a large terry towel from the bedroom, gave me some pajamas from her stock, showed me how to use the gas heater. There was not a shadow of doubt in her mind that Agnes would want to steal something from them, take advantage of her trust and deceive her. After her shower, she went to the kitchen, where Amanda had already made her tea with milk and a sandwich with doctor's sausage, which her children loved so much. In the light of the orange lamp, the landlady changed her mind once more. Agnes looked even older when she came out of the hot water, with her hair loose around her shoulders and a deep look in her marsh-colored eyes. Sleep came to both of them. Even though Amanda had to get up at 7 to take her son to school and her daughter to kindergarten, she was curious. She wanted to ask the girl if she remembered anything about her mysterious past. Madeline stretched out sweetly in bed like a graceful kitten. Freedom of movement, freedom of action, freedom to call and text her lover's mobile phone. There was no longer that nasty Nicole standing between them. Ugh. I had to name my daughter so intricately for that oligarch. She is Nicolette Stevenson, favored daughter, wife of a business partner, a successful young woman. So where is she now? I'm looking for her in the field. It was a good idea of hers to get that upstart out of the way. She and her beloved from the school desk made eyes at each other. She with simple dreams, with dreams of a prince on a white horse. He's the son of a successful businessman, Harry. Who in town doesn't know this famous corporation of 2 long-time associates of Stevenson and the father of her sweet boy? How upset she was when Eric was sent to study in London at some economics academy. They danced so languidly and tenderly at graduation, the envy of all their classmates. Rumors were flying around the school that they were a couple. And then there's this surprise with this study abroad thing. Nicole was not wasting time with her studies at that moment either. The 2 avid business partners owned shopping malls, restaurants, and supermarkets around the city. Yes, they don't have London, New York, or even major cities here. It's just an average-sized town. But by local standards, the fortunes of the owners of all this wealth are enormous. That kind of big business has to go into safe hands. So Nicole, as everyone around her called her, went to university after school, graduated from the Department of Food Experts. She learned to determine the quality of sausage, cheese, chocolate, and all other products almost unmistakably by their appearance. Eric returned from London a serious, thoughtful young man. Harry was already rubbing his hands together in anticipation that he would be able to hand over the business to his rightful heir in a little while. Stevenson, Nicole's father, was older than his age. Despite the opportunity to receive any treatment in the best clinics in the world, with health and physical capabilities increasingly gave up. In every possible way joined the business to his daughter, who turned out to be a clever and wise assistant. Once, when Eric was still studying in the UK, the two men had a serious conversation. "Harry, mate, you and I have known each other for so many years. In fact, we trust each other. What would you think of my modest plans for my son and your daughter? It would make a handsome couple. We'd pool our capital for future grandchildren." "Yes, Mr. Harry, given the 17-year age difference. I never called my partner by name. I'll be glad to see our offspring work out to our mutual satisfaction. I think they'll get to know each other. They're not the first, they're not the last, they're the ones who seal the business with marital ties. I think that marriage in our commercial times is better to conclude with people of their own circle, so that then unnecessary surprises did not arise. I agree with your idea." The two men had not forgotten when Eric had returned to his hometown, encouraged by his academic success. The two families, and the men had already discussed their plans with their wives and received full approval, began to organize picnics, parties, receptions with the obligatory condition the presence of the whole family. So willy-nilly Nicole and Eric had to cross paths all the time. The young people themselves were not stupid either. Far-reaching ideas of their parents with their minds approved. Of course, they did not feel great and bright love for each other. But love is not required for a marriage of convenience. The main thing was that they sympathized with each other, did not experience obvious dislike, were not negatively disposed when communicating close. The level of intelligence and development. Similar interests did the trick. To begin with, they went to lunch a couple of times in a restaurant, to a fashion exhibition and a touring performance of the Capitol's theater. A couple of months later, Eric invited Nicole to a romantic dinner, where he made her a marriage proposal, handed her a stylish ring and a dainty velvet box thick burgundy color. We drank to the possible future marital happiness. They decided on the date of the reception in honor of the official announcement of the engagement. Nicole allowed herself a couple of glasses of wine. Eric downed 200 grams of whiskey for courage, then made up his mind. "Nicole, I'm sorry to ask, but I'd like to know. Have you had experience with men before?" Nicole, not the least bit embarrassed, simply answered. "I had a 2-year student affair with a guy from a parallel group. We were in our 20s, who at that age only reads poetry and looks at the moon. I wasn't a monk in England either, having been with a student from another college for 3 years. We both knew it was a no-strings-attached affair. She's an educated, well-read person, a loyal mate. But we parted without tears or regrets. Both of us knew from the beginning that it was bound to happen at some point." After this frank conversation, it somehow happened by itself that at Nicole's flat, she had already been living separately from her parents for 2 years. Eric looked into her eyes questioningly. Nicole nodded. Both understood without words. There was a whole life ahead of them. They had to see if they were right for each other. This night for the two of them didn't become something beyond the clouds, fabulously magical. Mutual sympathy, youth, easy interest helped. Nicole had thought at the time that it could be like that. What Eric thought, no one ever knew. But he wasn't particularly disappointed either. The reception in honor of the engagement of the two heirs took place. They were both the only children in the family. The reception was organized at the highest level in the finest country restaurant. Hundreds of guests, the glitter of diamonds and emeralds on the ladies, expensive suits and watches on their bow, representatives of the press of all stripes from the city multi-circulation to the tabloids. Madeline sat in the beauty parlor and was bored. The queue for hairstyling was still not coming up. She and the girls had gathered at a cafe in the city center to impress everyone with her beauty. Over the years, Eric had become even more flamboyant. A little femme fatale. Married boring, she said. Why the verdict? Yes, the husband turned out to be a promising scientist, but such a nerd. In the shower sits with his snowflakes, all day long digging in old manuscripts. Where is it seen that in the age of the internet, a man collects information from ancient manuscripts? A doll like me should be brought out regularly, so that other men would be envious. And he kept saying, "Darling, you'll soon be proud of your new surname. On me will fall international recognition and fabulous royalties." Madeleine would not last a month with this plan. But he was surprisingly handsome and very good in bed. True, on the marital bed he rarely appeared. He preferred to sit in libraries and then at a desk until midnight. Some academy had given him a personal grant for all expenses, so he was not deprived of his daily bread. He had enough to live on with his young wife. Not luxurious, but not poor either. Madeleine dreamed of an endless and full-flowing stream of money, so that she could cling to it with greedy hands and lips when she wanted to drink wealth. To hold his material affirmations in her lap, her hands with long nails with a perfect manicure. She ran away from her scholarly husband as soon as she met a brash young entrepreneur at a hen party, socking away money left and right in a nightclub. Her husband had just rushed off to the library of a neighboring town. There's something interesting picked up for him, and there he stayed the night. She agreed to accompany the visiting businessman to his hotel room. The night went terribly, but she did not go home empty-handed after the meeting. Generous, inexperienced lover gave her such a sum for a couple of hours of dialogue which her husband did not give her for 6 months for expenses. Made it clear that the encounter was casual. There would be no sequel. Madeleine thought hard. She needs to find the chosen one, so that as a man was not much worse than her current husband, and in the funds are not constrained and not greedy, would be happy to cherish the woman she loved. It would be better, undoubtedly, that she received the status of his lawful wife. But that would still have to be worked on thoroughly. In the pile of magazines on the nightstand in the beauty parlor, something on the cover of one of them looked painfully familiar to her. She grabbed an edition of the local yellow press and laughed out loud for the whole room. "Look, the Golden Carp is back from London," she whispered fervently in her friend's ear. And he had found himself some bride in the local aristocratic beau monde. All intellectual with glasses. How was it in the famous comedy? "If she gives me one, I'll take her without a hitch, but first, Maggie, I have to show my first love in front of my eyes to see what a woman with a capital letter should look like." Madeleine's devious plans were not to be realized at once. Harry and Grant decided that it would be a good idea if their children went on not one trip like a honeymoon, but 2. First, they would go to the Dominican Republic with its tropical delights, dive into the turquoise Atlantic Ocean. They will walk by hand on velvet white sands, admire the local flora and fauna. At the same time, they will get used to the idea that immediately after their return, a big lavish wedding will be held in the city. The position obliges. After the marriage ceremony, the newlyweds will go to more civilized Europe for a couple of months to finally consolidate their feelings in the formed marriage union. They can manage without the heirs to the big kingdom for the time being. In Grant's office 5 years ago, a promising young specialist had appeared, and the elderly businessman had been delighted with him ever since. Grant was brilliantly educated, had received a red diploma in Washington, and was a native of their city. He refused to pursue a career in the capital for the reason that his elderly parents lived at home. They already required constant supervision. They themselves did not cope well even with household chores. A late child is the one and only. His father and mother still found the strength to help him graduate from the Lyceum, to get an education in Washington. And then they gave up. They sat in front of the TV all day long. Almost stopped going outside. Grant was recommended by Harry, an old university friend of his. "He's a rare bloke. He's a great personal assistant," he said. "Yes, we were going to leave the running of the holding company in the hands of our children," said Harry. "I have other plans. One can't interfere with the other. No one's suggesting that you make him CEO of the whole company. Let him hang around with you for a while and then we'll see." And he was right. The owners of the holding company had long trusted their deputy general director. Grant received this position from them a year ago. While the children were traveling, getting used to the new family life after the wedding, Grant was pulling all the managerial burdens and coped with them perfectly. Madeline was the only one who wasn't bored. While the newlyweds were out of town, she perfected her appearance again and again. The gossip of the world reported that Eric and Nicole's marriage had been officially registered after all. But when could such a trifling obstacle stop her? Or would this man be her husband? We'd just have to wait. The young people returned from Europe tanned and rested. Both were eager to get back to work as soon as possible. Relations between them were even reminiscent of mates. They were not in a hurry to have a child. They decided to delay this important matter. Madeline prepared the meeting with Eric as a strategic operation. She found out where the young businessman goes to lunch on weekdays, wore her most stylish outfit, knowing perfectly well that in it, and with fashionable, almost imperceptible makeup, she is irresistible. The altercation with the waitress attracted the attention of the entire catering establishment. At the moment when Eric had just sat down at one of the tables, Madeline had played the whole thing out. She gave the waitress a subtle nudge under her arm, and a cup of chocolate flew onto Madeline's snow-white suit. "What have you done?" she exclaimed. "Girl, do you know how much such a jacket from the latest collection can cost? You can't pay for it in a year with your meager salary." Eric involuntarily turned his head in the direction of the frightening lady and marveled how marvelously beautiful she was. Madeline also looked in his direction, immediately stopped bringing up the waitress, and smiled welcomingly. "Eric, are you?" she asked. A minute later, they were already sitting at the same table. Eric was amazed at the change that had taken place with his high school sweetheart. Groomed, regal, alluring, not like his quiet, always even-tempered, ordinary wife. Madeline had a fire in her that promised unearthly pleasure. "And Eric fell for me," the money hunter thought predatorily. "I've got to take this chance and squeeze him. But first, a little tease." "Oh, Eric, I'd love to meet you, but I'm in a hurry," said Madeline. "I have an appointment, and I have to go home and change. My suit is hopelessly ruined." "A little thing like that isn't worth your trouble," Madeline said. "Eric, where can I buy one just like it? Let's meet tomorrow and fix this mistake of the negligent waitress." The golden carp has taken the bait, Madeline decided in no uncertain terms. Eric was also burning with impatience, waiting for the next meeting with Madeline. In Eric's soul, conscience didn't even squeak. Grant liked Harry's daughter, and now his son's wife. He couldn't help it. No, that definition would not even be correct. Was he in love, or was it her? Nicole had long ago and hopelessly. This young woman walked past him like he was nothing. A polite hello when she met him, and immediately forgot he existed. With the gaze of a loving man, Grant noted that there was no real warmth between Nicole and Eric. Dry cultural politeness, a tribute to the idea of keeping and growing the business. That was where it ended. Once, a long time ago, before all the marital processes and even the engagement, Grant had even had the impulse to open up to Nicole, to tell her how he felt. But it was on that day that he had accidentally witnessed a conversation between Harry and Terrence's families. Harry said, "Can you imagine mate Terrence, the daughter of one of our competitors, married some penniless bloke, and the father didn't even bat an eye. Let her choose with her heart. What kind of sincere feelings can there be in our business? I think that with such views on life, a solid business will never be built." Hearing this rant, Grant immediately changed his mind about something to say to Nicole. He loved her silently to himself, not paying attention to other girls. Although with his masculine appearance, the entire female cohort of the team cast explosive glances at him. Thank God, at least his heart's secret no one guessed. There was chatter that his heart was broken by some hottie from New York. Eric and Madeline were drowning in an ocean of unearthly passion. In fact, Madeline herself did not throw herself into the maelstrom of all these sentimental tricks. She had calculated everything. Eric never came to a date without an expensive gift. Her entire flat was now littered with luxurious bouquets of flowers. There were incredibly expensive birthday outfits in her wardrobe, a small, sleek car of astronomical value, and even with technical tuning for the 8th of March, a stunningly beautiful canvas from Somalia. Eric was a generous lover, earned an excellent income, and had a personal bank account, with the contents of which his father had no interest. Let the boy have some funds for pocket money. Somehow, once again, Madeline was lazily bored. She ran through the television channels and came across an old, very old cartoon film called Last Year's Snow Falling. Its busy character kept moving through space with the phrase, "It's going to be a bit small." At that moment, Madeline acutely realized that she didn't want to remain in the role of the second woman in Eric's life. After all, her partner never stayed overnight at her place anyway, or went to Nicole's place in the next fancy hotel, and she even suspected that he never did his marital duty at home. Nicole lived in complete ignorance. Her husband at work, at corporate receptions, at city social gatherings was always there, as he should be. And how he spent his time in other hours, she did not care at all. Inside Nicole lived a certain mystery. After returning from Europe, already being the legal wife of Harry Jr., she once found herself at work in the same lift with Deputy General Manager Grant. He stood silently, without making a sound, facing his boss's daughter. He was looking at her in a way that gave her goosebumps. A thought was born in her head. I shouldn't think that. But you can't fool yourself. If only instead of Eric, my husband had been this charismatic, charming, very intelligent, and very polite man. Why did fate decide that I should continue the dynasty in my father's business? One must follow the call of one's heart. On the top floor, Nicole stepped out of the lift and headed for her office, dispelling the obsession on the way, the magic of Grant so suddenly captivating her. She'd liked the young man from the first moment she'd met him. But she remembered her father's favorite motto: "The position obliges." She pulled herself together and ordered, "Don't you dare even think of him. Your fate is the fate of the girl in the novel. But I'm given to another, and I'll be faithful to him forever. So pull yourself together and work." Nicole hadn't forgotten that meeting in the lift. She pulled those memories out of the recesses of her mind when she was alone. Her father had been shifting more and more business tasks onto her shoulders. She and Grant were always crossing paths at meetings, but they sat far apart. Nicole didn't even notice that her husband Eric's schedule was increasingly filled with overnight trips to branch offices. Their cold marriage of convenience did not bring them both simple human happiness. Nicole couldn't even remember the last time she and her husband had been close. At that time, Madeline was preparing to give Eric an ultimatum, either her or that nasty Nicole. Eric was disappearing more and more often with his mistress, sometimes for the whole weekend. She decided that the next few days, coinciding with the annual holiday, would be a good time to talk. Eric had promised that they would fly to Miami for all 3 days under the guise of a business meeting with Southern partners. The trip to Miami was extremely romantic. There was only one thing that frustrated Eric. Madeline did not want to spend time in bed. He was drawn to a Cuban restaurant or a trendy new chain cafe where the seafood was amazing. Even lavish shopping at the local mall hadn't made her more amenable. The man was puzzled by this behavior of hers, reeking of either chill or indifference. By nightfall, after a lavish dinner at the most expensive restaurant in the resort, Madeline hardly showed up and got into bed with him side by side, but she wouldn't let him near her. She started a conversation. "Eric, don't you think it's time for us to make up our minds about our relationship? I'm not going to spend the rest of my life as your second lover." "Girl, you know what our marriage to Nicole is based on. Divorce is impossible. We're the management center of a huge holding company. If it doesn't hold together, it's going to crack. There'll be no more opportunities to spoil you like this." "But what about me?" Eric asked angrily, not expecting such a blatant refusal at once. "The eternal number 2 in the shadow of your Nicole. That's not going to happen." That night, for the first time, Eric was never allowed to see the body. He flew home angry. Madeline, sitting next to him, kept her mask of hurt and offense on her face. They both took separate taxis home. A week after that ill-fated trip to Miami, Madeline had a new plan in her head. If Nicole couldn't be moved, she had to be wiped off the face of the earth. She did not even care about the fact that such a plan smells of crime. Madeline was still in a furious rage. Eric decided to take time out and give his precious mistress time to calm down and accept his arguments wisely. That's why it didn't even occur to him to be suspicious when his wife disappeared without returning from work one evening. Upon learning that Nicole, whom he loved devotedly, had disappeared, Grant was at a loss for words and decided to conduct his own investigation. It had long seemed to him that Eric had been acting extremely strange in recent months. Telling his father and his partner that he would be late in the office with the documents that had accumulated like a snowball. and then mysteriously disappearing as soon as the two partners went home. Unable to resist, he decides to play a homegrown private investigator, to follow Eric, who, once outside the walls of the holding company, was not really hiding. Grant learned about the fact that he had a mistress after a couple of days. Moreover, following the heir to the family turned into an obsession for Grant. He recorded the facts of Eric's adultery with pedantry and meticulousness, expensive spending on gifts, trips to restaurants, trips to country clubs, dates in secluded hotels. He was eager to build up a collection of pictures, and he'd taken plenty of shots of Eric and Madeline from different angles, and get all that dirt in front of their families. The only thing stopping him was that he didn't know the terms of the marriage. What was disconcerting was that Nicole remained completely unperturbed. Meeting her alone in the lift, he tried to understand her inner state. He even scolded himself later for keeping an eye on her, trying to see through her like an X-ray. She was absolutely as calm as usual. She did not resemble a woman suffering from her husband's treacherous betrayal. The last straw in Grant's patience with Eric's low behavior was Nicole's disappearance. Everyone in the office had seen the young woman take her bag in the evening and hurry to the exit to the car park, get into her car and drive away. Nicole didn't show up at home that day. Eric didn't sound the alarm until the next day. He had gone out with Madeline the night his wife disappeared. Mistress again turned into a wax pussycat, faithfully looked into her eyes and said that she understood everything and agreed to everything, as long as the beloved was near. The day after the mysterious disappearance of her daughter, Joyce was no laughing matter. She was madly in love with Nicole, though she tried not to show it to anyone. The entire security team of the holding company had been alerted, and the police had joined in. Harry had enlisted the help of some private investigators he knew, to no avail. All the city and regional hospitals and morgues had already been checked. Joyce's men with Nicole's picture had looked at all the unidentified female corpses. A week later, Nicole's car was found near a park on a short walk with her bag lying orphaned in the back seat. To everyone's surprise, no barbarity had been committed to the property. Harry was going crazy, and Grant was tossing and turning between his duty to the chief and his inner doubts, all the while asking himself, how am I going to show Joyce a picture of her son-in-law with his mistress? It would lead to a quarrel between long-standing business partners, a split of a huge company, a misunderstanding between two businessmen in whose hands many of the city's commercial arteries were connected. Still, Grant made up his mind. He came to the boss's office on woozy legs, not because he realized he was likely to lose his place in the holding company. He didn't care as long as Nicole was found. As long as she was alive and well. He knocked firmly on the door. He saw at once that Joyce had lost a great deal of color in the last few days, the Earth's fifth complexion, the fallen, unhappy eyes. What do you want, Grant? I haven't much time for work at the moment, she said. I think you ought to see this, Mistress Joyce, Grant said. He fanning the table with all the pictures he'd taken of Eric's movements. The businesswoman took the dirt on her son-in-law on her hands and went through the photos one by one, becoming more gloomy than ever. I have a feeling that Nicole's disappearance has something to do with this woman, Grant added. Why were you guys doing all this snooping? Digging up your bosses, wanting to dig up something exclusive and ruin our reputation? I love your daughter, Mrs. Joyce. I wasn't digging and digging. I just want her to be happy. Eric's behavior had been suspicious to me for some time, so I rushed to find out what's going on. Can you fire me now? Why didn't you come to me earlier with all this nastiness? Nicole seemed very serene to me. I didn't see fit to disturb her peace. Joyce glared at Grant once more, then pressed the secretary's call button. Send the head of security to me and tell Mr. Harry I'd like to see him in my office. Grant was taken aback. In the past, the younger Joyce had always gone to the partner herself when she had questions. Yes, and all corporate meetings were always held in the boardroom next to Harry's office. You're free to go, Grant. I'll let you know how I feel about your outside initiatives, Joyce said. The conversation between the two oldest partners was heavy. But first Joyce showed Harry all the photos Grant had taken. Without saying where she had got the material from, she asked directly, "Did you know your son was having an affair with his mistress?" "No, I didn't know that," Harry replied. "If I had known, I would have tried to stop it. The head of security knocked on the door. The men concentrated on working out a plan to find Nicole due to the newly discovered circumstances. Madeleine was nonchalantly drinking coffee and chatting with a friend on the phone when someone knocked on her flat door. She stretched sweetly, pulled up the hem of her silk dressing gown and asked coquettishly, "Honey, is this your idea of a joke? You have a key, don't you?" "Open up, Madeleine. Eric sent us to see you," came the reply. The woman opened the door immediately. Two big guys, either from the military or from the sporting world, poured into the flat. "Where's Nicole?" One of them asked sharply. "We warn you that the next person who knocks on your door will be the police." Madeleine flapped her eyelashes indignantly. "I don't know who Nicole is. There must be some mistake." The second of the uninvited guests dumped photos on the coffee table in front of her. "We'll still prove that you had something to do with her disappearance. And then you'll be facing a much more serious criminal offense than you are now." In a moment, the beautiful Madeleine, hiding her face in horror, turned into a pitiful semblance of a femme fatale. She hurried off in a confused hurry. "I only asked the boys at the bar to scare her. And those idiots overdid it, hit her on the head from behind with something heavy. When I gave them the money for the work, they said they were confused, took her under their arms to the waiting room at the railway station and sat her on a free chair. She didn't lose consciousness after the injury, but she became lethargic and strange. They thought it would be a good thing and tried to disappear as quickly as possible." The bloke showed her the phone they'd recorded the conversation and her confession on. "You'd better go to the police yourself, as a customer. If Nicole's father takes you in, things will be much worse," they said firmly. Further searches became easier. The security service of the holding company turned the whole station upside down and came to the lair of the bums. When they saw Agnes's photo, they told everything they knew without refusal. Yeah, they found one at the station, dragged her in. Rose's doctor nursed her back to health, treated her as best she could. Only she never remembered who she was. Then they all taught the new girl a trade, how not to disappear in the big city. Clothes were taken. Expensive ones were lost and sold at the clothing market. Watches and jewelry went there too. Agnes didn't have her phone with her. Apparently the people who hit her on the head took the expensive toy. A few days ago, she didn't return from a night out in the field where she used to work part-time. So, she was picking weighed fruit and vegetables in the back of supermarkets. It's a temp job. If you look decent, they can trust you. The entire security service of the holding company went to all the places where homeless people sometimes try to earn a little bit of honest money. In 2 places, Nicole was immediately recognized, and in one shop, the checkout lady said, "I know this girl. She's always so polite and cultured. She often buys groceries from us. Sometimes she comes alone, sometimes with an older woman or with her younger brothers and sisters." The servicemen were surprised. "Maybe it's not our Nicole. They all live in that 5-story building, but we can't name the flat." "You can ask the grandmothers in the courtyard," the cashier told them. Amanda couldn't be happy that one dark autumn night she met Agnes in the courtyard. She was a golden assistant, clearly well-educated and well-read. She found an excellent rapport with the children, who listened to all her stories with their mouths open. Marcus was hugging Agnes by the side of her leg and would not let her go. Amanda could now safely leave the house to study with the students. The school year was gaining momentum, and many students were lagging behind in Russian language and literature. There was no shortage of clients. Amanda went to the supermarket to buy some cakes. They would have a sweet party tonight with Agnes and the children to watch some interesting film. The cashier at the exit looked at her strangely, as if she wanted to say something, but then remained silent. Amanda thought, "My mascara must have smeared when I rubbed my eye with my fist. Well, the house is just around the corner. And there's a mirror." The drive to their entrance was blocked by a cortege of expensive cars. All elite foreign cars, big with shiny pearlescent sides. Men in strict suits, white shirts, and ties stood near the cars. One of them was obviously very nervous. Grant was asking to ride with security to where Nicole was presumably now, so pitifully that the stern businessman McDowell's heart trembled. "Go ahead. But to me they're without any tricks," he said. It had recently occurred to Harry that they had been wrong to strategize a marriage of convenience between the children of two high-ranking families. Eric, after his affair with Madeline had been discovered, had rushed to follow new trails, and lingered under the police station where his mistress was in custody. Grant, on the other hand, wouldn't go home until security brought new tidings to the chief in the evenings about how the search for Nicole was progressing. You can't command the heart to love. It's not subject to human will, he thought. Amanda walked up to her flat as if through a line, but stopped when she heard her neighbor Chloe's voice. Oh, there she is herself. Is it in her house now, the girl you're looking for? Is that who all those expensive Jeeps with tinted windows are after? I knew Agnes was a tricky girl. What an entourage. She turned to the men. I'll take one of you with me. You're going to scare the children with this team? Shall I go? The handsome man, who seemed to be the most nervous, stepped forward. The head of security grinned. Well, go on, Mr. Deputy General Manager. Maybe you'll be of more use. Agnes opened the door and saw a strange man behind Amanda. He rushed towards her, grabbed her in his arms. Oh my God, Nicole, are you alive? It's so good to see you. We all went crazy when you disappeared. A click in my head, a brief flash, a silver lift with a stylish design. Two people enter the office, a man and a woman. And the woman felt so good to have this man around. That's what Grandma Rose used to say back at the homeless shelter. Your memory is like lightning flying. It will come back, baby. You just need strong emotions and it will serve you well again. Away with doubt. Nicole remembered who she was, how she'd parked her car outside a kiosk to buy a bottle of cool mineral water, how someone had approached quietly from behind, as if sneaking around, and then pain and failure. Nicole stepped towards Grant and put her arms around his strong, powerful shoulders. It's good to see you too, Grant. It's really good to see you. Since the mysterious story of Nicole's disappearance, there have been abrupt changes in the city's richest holding company. Mr. Harry, who had been very hard hit by recent events, had completely handed over the reins of the company to his partner, Mr. McDowell. He even sold his shareholding to him. They say it's undervalued, as compensation for moral hazard. The rich don't get it. Harry's son, Eric, lives in a town near the penal colony where his mistress Madeline is serving time. He started drinking. Recently, he was even seen in the company of two local celebrity alcoholics, Henry and Alex. Madeline herself does not react to the exploits of her lover. She is having an affair with one of the zone workers. Why does she need Eric? Now it is necessary to look for a more favorable option for themselves. McDowell did his best for his daughter. Madeline's going to be in the penitentiary for another 6 years. Her lawyer hinted she might not even be eligible for parole. Grant and Nicole were recently married, but on a wedding trip abroad refused to go. They went to conquer Karelia with its beauty. No luxury hotels. A tent, a fire, soup in a kettle, tea with berries, a really favorite person next to them. That's happiness. Mr. McDowell has taken up charity work. His first brainchild was a school for talented children from disadvantaged families. The director of the school, a teacher of Russian and literature, Amanda. Her youngest son, Marcus, learned to read early. He spends hours in the library at his mom's work. Recently, Amanda took a Maupassant book away from him and said, "That's not for you to read yet, my young lover of good literature." Amanda herself has not yet found a man to her liking. There is no equal to Kevin, so it's better to be alone than with anyone. Each of them learnt their lessons from the fact that fate once pushed them into this world. They each drew their own conclusions from what had happened. Life is a mixed bag.